It is the top of the hour. I'm Adrienne Bankert in for Nicole Burley. Thank you so much for joining us here on News Nation Now. We want to get straight to Texas, where Governor Greg Abbott is giving us an update on those wildfires. Let's listen.
The entire panhandle.
Okay, I'm going to work on my
then as, of course, you're close to ground, you see that what was once homes or other structures or property has been reduced to nothing more than ashes, something that can never be used again whatsoever. And that amplifies the magnitude of the devastation that so many families have suffered across this entire area. We're dealing with an area right here that is the largest area for fire in Texas history. And as I understand it from the judge, about 70% of Hemphill County was burned. 47 families have been displaced. And these families face a life of total uncertainty at this time. This is something where everything in their life has been incinerated, and they are grappling with the immediate consequences of having no place to call home. Because in part of the people in this region reaching out, helping others, there are some people who have immediate homes. Because of the Red Cross is stepping up to provide shelter, at least in the short run. But the fact of the matter is, we as a state and we as a community here in Hemphill County, we all need to make sure that the people who have lost their homes, they're going to have a pathway to restoration of a place where they can live and they can call home. Along those lines, a task force has been created to address those needs with funding going to the First Baptist Church 501c3. This right here is a sign for people to make donations to. And trust me, these people need donations at this time like never before, and we want to make sure donations are getting to a location that's not going to be fraudulent, that's not going to be using up the money, but instead providing the money to those who have lost everything in helping these people recover and get back to a sense of normalcy as quickly as possible. One thing that we found is not just our fellow Texans, but our fellow Americans are always so incredibly generous during these times when their fellow Americans have faced devastation. And let me just say thank you in advance to everybody across the state and across the country who is willing to step up and help out with making a donation at this website location, so that you're going to be able to help these families be able to rebuild as quickly as possible. I want you to know that we also at the state level have the
remind those great
medication port, also known as a power port, port catheter, or chemo port, and
expecting or speculating, but what would be her next move?
Well, first of all, it's great to be with you, Adrienne. And listen, you said it best when you quoted my favorite R&B band, Boyz II Men, at the top of this segment. This has got to be the end of the road for Nikki Haley. And, you know, it doesn't make me happy to say that, because I think it's always great when, as a Republican, I have options. But the reality is there are no second places in campaigns. You either win or you lose. There's no honorable mentions or silver medals. She has to ultimately make the case to her donors that they need to stick with her if she's going to continue, because campaigns are really expensive, especially at the scale that she's trying to wage one on.
Yeah, and it's so interesting to me that both she and DeSantis spent so much energy critiquing their former mentor, the person who opened doors for them, and all of a sudden had to try to pivot to be different than Trump when they aligned with a lot of the same platform issues as Trump. So this was this a losing battle all along?
Well, I think that feels a little disingenuous. I think one of the reasons people had a hard time putting their arms around people like DeSantis and Nikki was DeSantis essentially ran as a Trump light, and Nikki had worked on his administration, and so it does feel as though they want to take advantage of the Trump name when it works to their benefit, but when they don't want to, they want to turn on him and try to draw contrast. The problem with Nikki, and I think DeSantis as well, is that they didn't really go out trying to attack Trump early enough. They didn't really try to make distinctions between Trump and their candidacies early enough to make voters stop and think about what they really wanted going into the general election. And so because they held back trying not to upset the Trump voters, I think they ended up upsetting people a little more and coming off as, I think for Nikki, a little weaker than she should have been.
Yeah. In some states, we do know that Haley was able to reach independent, even Democratic voters.
Yeah.
But do you think that President Trump has any territory to gain there? I mean, really, he has been so polarizing. It's a love-or-hate relationship with so many folks.
You know, again, every race comes down to two people, really, especially in a general election. And what really matters is not whether he's, repugnant or the things he says are scandalous, because they are so often the times. I can say that as a Republican. I don't like it when Donald Trump speaks poorly of people. However, how is he doing compared to who he's running against ultimately is what matters. And as you saw in the New York Times, Sienna, poll over the weekend that everyone keeps talking about, the numbers are damning for Biden. At the end of the day, he is way more unpopular than Donald Trump was at this time in his campaign, 4 years ago. And this is the constant quandary that we're dealing with, because even if you look to Kamala Harris, there's nobody to help boost the ticket for Biden. There's no win for him moving forward. He's only getting less and less capable of answering questions and holding his own. And America sees it on display.
Really, really quick follow-up, because we're almost out of time, Denise. But have you heard any rumblings in Washington about another person stepping up to be VP with the Biden ticket?
I mean, there's so many rumblings that I'm hearing. I'm not a Democrat, so I probably don't get the best intel on the Democratic side. But one thing I've heard from a lot of my friends that are deeply involved in the Democratic side is that there's definitely rumblings, if not more than rumblings, that VP and Biden himself are on the chopping block to some degree. That might be wishful thinking, but if I were you, I'd ask somebody who's probably a little more plugged in on that side.
All right. Well, you tell your people to call our people, and we'll have a conversation.
I'll do that, Adrienne. Anything for you.
Thank you. Denise Grace Gitsham, thank you so much. All
Have
right.
a great day.
We've got a good show for the rest of the hour here for you, and some stories that are really interesting. How about convicted killer Scott Peterson potentially being exonerated in one of the most well-known murders of our lifetime? Could he get a new trial? We'll talk about it. And more chaos in Haiti. Thousands of prison inmates released on the streets, and a ruthless gang leader looking to oust the Haitian prime minister. Details ahead. And don't forget to tune in to News Nation's special live coverage of Super Tuesday results starting tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern. A new trial for a convicted murderer? That's the hope for Scott Peterson, found guilty in 2004 of killing his pregnant wife. And the lawyers with the LA Innocence Project have now taken up his case. Peterson's new legal team says a closer look at evidence from the original trial is needed and could potentially lead to his exoneration. News Nation's Laura Engel live now for us. Laura, a California judge has officially set up a status hearing. This is serious.
It is very serious. In fact, it's happening just next week. It's a week from today, and there are a lot of questions about key items of discovery in this case for these attorneys. But, of course, the biggest question will be, is it going to be enough? This major development comes less than 2 months after Scott Peterson's new attorneys with the Los Angeles Innocence Project filed a motion to ask the courts to reopen the files on this 2 decades-old case. So here we go. The hearing, scheduled for next Tuesday, March 12th, will bring those LAIP attorneys to court in Redwood City to ask a judge to allow them to have evidence in the case reevaluated, claiming that Scott Peterson's state and federal constitutional rights were violated and that there is new evidence they have found, which raises many questions about who they say abducted and killed Lacey Peterson and her unborn child, Connor, on Christmas Eve of 2002. We all remember this case. Their bodies were found along the San Francisco shoreline roughly 4 months after Laci was reported missing. Now, we went back to Modesto in January of this year to show our viewers the crux of Peterson's defense, an alleged connection to a burglary that took place right across the street from the Petersons' former home. Peterson's attorneys have always claimed that Laci may have stumbled across a burglary in progress that turned violent while she was out walking their dog. The time frame was also right around when Scott Peterson says he left his home to go fishing in the San Francisco Bay. The LAIP has also raised questions about a burned-out orange van that was found just 1 mile away from the Petersons' home Christmas morning of 2002, which contained a mattress with possible blood stains. The Petersons' attorneys say were never fully tested, and that is what the Innocence Project wants them to retest. Now, attorneys for Peterson are also looking for interviews from witnesses who say they saw Laci walking her dog after Scott left their home, and they want to see the videotaped interviews with those burglars who admitted to their crimes of doing the burglary, and they believe they could provide new clues. And many of the jurors and the former police investigators that we have spoke with about these reported new findings say while they still stand by their belief that Peterson is guilty, they say, look, if there's something to be tested, let's retest it. Laci Peterson's family members have declined our request for comment. The hearing, again, takes place next Tuesday, and we'll be there. Adrienne?
All right. We look forward to more reporting. Laura, thank you so much. How likely is this request for a new trial to be granted?
Yeah, it is very rare. It would be incredible if this were to happen. But California, we did pull up some information from Berkeley Law that I want to read you really quick. They report that California leads the nation in exonerations as defined by the National Registry of Exonerations with 120 cases. So we'll have to see if this is going to be 121.
All right. Thank you very much, Laura. More to come. After the break, in Haiti, a violent gang leader releases thousands of inmates now on the streets in a sort of militia trying to overthrow the Haitian prime minister. We'll have the full story for you. It is still early on this Super Tuesday. The California Senate primary race is getting down to the wire there. Congressman Adam Schiff leading with some major fundraising. Low voter turnout could benefit Schiff in the crowded race to serve a full term vacated by the late Senator Dianne Feinstein. But Republican Steve Garvey could still eclipse the Democratic frontrunner. NewsNation's Joe Khalil joining us live right now in California. Joe, I was talking to Sean Spicer, our NewsNation contributor, and he's saying that even as a Republican, he believes it would be bad if Garvey wins this seat.
Well, that is an interesting take that I would not expect from Sean Spicer. So we'll dig into why he said that. I want to give you a lay of the land here before we get into the race. It's certainly an interesting one. We've got our eyes on Adrienne. This is in Burbank. This is California's 30th congressional district, actually Adam Schiff's home district here. And we've seen a steady stream of voters come through this morning. In fact, the vote center manager tells us it has exceeded his expectations so far. California makes it very easy. You can come in. We've seen people drop their ballots off here, the drop-off station. You can come in today. You can do it the old school way on one of the machines. And actually, this is different. You can actually also go to your house, do it on your laptop, and you print off a QR code on your phone that you can scan here. It gives you the ballot you filled out, and then you turn that in. So a lot of ways here to vote. And the race that we're really keeping an eye on in California, as you mentioned, is that Senate race. So you do have Adam Schiff. You've also got two other very popular California Democrats in Katie Porter and Barbara Lee. And then on the Republican side, Steve Garvey, someone who Californians know very well, a baseball star, right? He was on the Dodgers and the Padres, so people know who he is. And conventional wisdom would tell you this may be an Adam Schiff, Katie Porter two-person race. But Garvey, as you mentioned, has been polling second for weeks now, doing very well beyond expectations. A lot of people think that that's because Schiff has been sort of elevating Garvey. He's been running millions and millions of dollars in ads talking about how this is a two-person race, a Schiff versus Garvey. And that has really upset some Democrats, especially those supporting Katie Porter. Katie herself has referenced this, saying that it's big money that's influencing this from Adam Schiff. Remember, this is a jungle primary in California, as it's called. So you've got everyone, Republican, Democrat, Independent, everyone on one ballot, and the top two vote getters will advance in November. So if it is Adam Schiff and Steve Garvey, some might say that's a much easier opponent in November for Adam Schiff. There hasn't been a Republican who's won statewide in California, Adrian, since 2006. A guy by the name of Arnold Schwarzenegger, who you may have heard from, somebody with worldwide name ID there. So that is the dynamic that we're watching here. And as the votes come in, it is going to be interesting to see whether Garvey keeps that lead over Katie Porter, whether Adam Schiff keeps his #1 spot, because it's going to tell us who's on the ballot in November in that crucial presidential vote in the general. Adrian.
A jungle primary. All right, things getting wild for sure. Joe Khalil, thank you so much. The U.S. has one message for any Americans in Haiti. Get out now. A coalition on gangs known as G9 joining forces to overthrow the Haitian government, breaking out thousands of inmates from the country's largest prisons. This violence comes since the acting Prime Minister, Ariel Henry, postponed plans to hold elections and remain in power, power he assumed since the assassination of then Haitian President Jovenel Moise 2 years ago. But the leader of G9, Jimmy Barbecue Cherizier, says the violence will not stop until Henry steps down. Cherizier is a former Haitian national police officer, but was fired after being accused of several human rights abuses, including a massacre that killed over 70 people in Haiti's capital, getting the nickname Barbecue for the brutal acts he carried out against his enemies. Barbecue's grip in Haiti's slums are very strong. He says that they will stop fighting once the current prime minister, Ariel Henry, steps down. And joining me right now is Haitian journalist James Pierre. You'll have to forgive me if I butchered any of those names, but I think that we make the point that there are a lot of players in this and a lot of rumor and speculation over who may have assassinated is it Moïse? Jovenel Moïse?
That's correct. Yeah, I think you are doing an amazing job with the names, as a matter of fact, Adrian.
Thank you, especially someone who doesn't know French except for maybe from 6th grade. But obviously, I mean, Haiti has been in turmoil for many, many years, but this is perhaps unprecedented, would you say?
Absolutely, Adrian. You and I have been covering Haiti for quite some time now. And once again, Haiti is in great danger now, leading by different groups, gang members. You mentioned Jimmy Cherizier, a former police officer, now taking arms against the current government. We are talking about the Prime Minister Ariel Henry, who was supposed actually to organize elections in Haiti after the assassination of President Jovenel Moïse 6 months. Now he's been in power for 3 years. So we have these groups, gang members. They are taking controls of different parts of Haiti, institutions, the airport, the prisons. As a matter of fact, they are also asking to take care of the National Palace, and other sectors of the population are also helping these gang members to send a strong message that they don't want the prime minister to lead. They want another government.
So is there someone opposed to it's Ariel Henry, or is it Ariel Henry?
That's right, Ariel Henry. I mean, in French, Ariel Henry, but Ariel Henry, that's the same way.
Okay, yeah. This gentleman who has been the interim leader of Haiti, he refuses to step down. Would there be people on another side or opposing party who have worked to somehow subvert the prison system to release some of these prisoners, or am I getting into far too much conspiracy for this story?
Absolutely. That's a great question. There have been many different sectors. They call them the opposition leaders, and also other political parties proposing other options for Haiti, another transitional government. Members of the U.S. government are actually talking to some of them to see what are the possibilities. But Ariel Henry, again, are not opening up to any other conversation or dialogue to say, okay, here's what we're going to do in terms of a coalition. That's why now you have that turmoil in Haiti. Different political parties are protesting on the street. Gang members are also operating on another side. And Ariel Henry, what makes everything now become more difficult is his latest statement made about a week ago, saying that, yes, he's willing now to organize elections, but it's going to be in the next 2 years. So population saying they cannot afford to have Ariel Henry for 5 years, rather have another transitional government that can clearly organize fair elections in Haiti.
And this could be, I mean, this is serious in terms of not just the political upheaval, but in terms of Haiti's future. And I know the gangs, they tried to gain control of Haiti's main international airport. There are so many missions groups, church ministries, volunteers, doctors who go to Haiti in hopes of serving this community, helping them to recover from, tragedies, from earthquakes to just poverty. But should all Americans, should anyone not from Haiti leave immediately?
Well, that's why we have a statement from the State Department asking all the U.S. citizens to leave, because right now, who's in control? It's very difficult. You cannot help a group or a population if you are not safe at all. Haitian doctors, they cannot even go to the Haitian hospitals because either they might be being kidnapped or you never know what can happen. Confrontation between police officers and gang members, anything is possible on the ground. You mentioned also shortages of food in Haiti, very critical situation. Remember that after the assassination of President Jovenel Moise, now half of the Haitian population are living with less than $2. So things are getting worse when we have a political turmoil like that.
One quick question for you. Has anyone provided solutions for what could ease tensions? Do Haitians believe there needs to be an election for the leader of Haiti?
There are sectors in the U.S., NEON, the Haitian Association of Elected Officials, they are proposing different options to save Haiti this time. We have also the Haitian diaspora getting together and asking how they can work in terms of the safety of Haiti to organize upcoming elections. But also Haitians in Haiti, they have also a saying in the situation, asking that how they can not only restore the justice system in Haiti and also see how they can have elections with a fair new government, they'll be able to breathe this time.
Yeah. Well, there's some problems in Haiti that are far deeper than we can even discuss here in these few minutes. James Pierre, thank you for joining us here on News Nation. We appreciate you.
As always, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. We have some breaking news. Kyrsten Sinema making a major announcement about her time in the Senate. She will not seek re-election. We'll talk about that more after the break. And crime in the nation's capital, still to come, a look at a new bill aimed at reducing the violence, the assaults, homicides in Washington, D.C. that have continued to be on the rise. And crime takes on new meaning when our correspondent becomes the target. Ahead, News Nation having a firsthand experience at California, specifically San Francisco Bay Area crime. We have some breaking news now. Independent Senator from Arizona, Kyrsten Sinema, says she will not seek re-election. Let's get right to it with Alex Capriello live in the newsroom. Alex?
Yeah, hey, Adrian. The senator from Arizona says she won't seek re-election at the end of the year, giving up a run that has lasted more than 20 years in the state of Arizona. Sinema says she's tired of the political gamesmanship and divisiveness that has taken over the country over the last few years, before touting some of her accomplishments, like bringing clean water to Arizonans, expanding the semiconductor industry, and finding solutions to historic droughts. She revealed more about her reason to leave Congress. Take a listen.
The only political victories that matter these days are symbolic. Attacking your opponents on cable news or social media. Compromise is a dirty word. We've arrived at that crossroad, and we chose anger and division. I believe in my approach, but it's not what America wants right now. I love Arizona, and I am so proud of what we've delivered. Because I choose civility, understanding, listening, working together to get stuff done, I will leave the Senate at the end of this year.
Sinema leaves the Senate after just one term. Polls have consistently shown her in third place in a hypothetical three-way race with Republican Kari Lake and Democrat Ruben Gallego. Adrian.
All right, Alex, thanks for jumping on that one for us. Crime on top of mind for many people living and working and visiting the nation's capital. Homicides, robberies, carjackings have technically gone down, right? The numbers are better than we've seen in the previous year, but violent crime remains higher than in many other big cities. And right now, the D.C. Council is meeting, expected to pass a sweeping new crime bill. NewsNation's Evan Lambert live in Washington, D.C. for us. And this focuses less on criminal justice reform and more on prosecution and punishment, correct?
Right, Adrian, it's a pretty staggering flip-flop from the D.C. Council just 4 years ago when, at that time, they embraced progressive policies when it comes to crime. But this new crime bill, it would up penalties for certain gun crimes, also give D.C. police the ability to easily disperse people from what they call drug-free zones. It also lowers the threshold to make theft a felony charge. But really, this crime bill is a response to D.C. residents over the last year or so in the face of a crime surge, expressing their fear. This afternoon, the D.C. Council expected to vote on the Secure D.C. crime package. It is expected to pass, the last vote garnering close to unanimous support among the council members. The bill expands the definition of carjacking to help stem the tide of a crime we saw surge in recent years. It also gives judges power to hold more people charged with violent crimes in jail before trial. New provisions target retail theft, like creating a new felony for directing retail theft. And here's the context to this. Last year, homicides were up 35%, the worst level in 2 decades, and violent crime overall was up 39%. I spoke with a supervising prosecutor in the U.S. Attorney's Office for D.C., which, along with the mayor's office, supports this crime bill.
We are really supportive of Secure D.C. for all the tools it gives us to approach a bunch of different crimes, and really hope that the council passes it for that reason. We think it has a lot of great things that will help us prosecute a variety of different violent crimes.
But on the flip side, there are some early indicators trending in a positive direction for the nation's capital. Homicides down 32% in the first 2 months of the year compared to last year, and all violent crime is down 12% here in D.C. This crime bill, it also does face some criticism from activists saying that it would unjustly put people in jail for longer. Adrian?
All right, Evan Lambert, thank you very much. Crime also on the ballot in one of the West Coast's biggest cities, San Francisco. It's one of the country's major cities that has been hit hard by crime. I mean, to the point where you don't even recognize San Francisco anymore. Smash and grabs have been on the rise, and a proposition is on the ballot today that would make it easier for law enforcement to crack down. Just yesterday, just this week, our own News Nation crew were the victims of a smash and grab. Their vehicle was burglarized in broad daylight. News Nation's Nancy Liu, she was there. It happened to her and her crew. And Nancy, I mean, first of all, tell us what happened. You guys were only away from the vehicle for about 10 minutes, right?
Less than 10 minutes, Adrian, but things happen fast around here. I'm always on guard when I come here, and we are with security guards when we come here, but things do happen. We were over in Oakland to conduct some interviews about crime when we fell victim to crime. We were inside a restaurant called Agave Uptown, and as we were inside, bash, our side window, somebody broke into it. My bag was not in front. It was not within view, but someone took my work bag with my News Nation computer. I had an iPad in there, all of my work gear. So learning the hard way that you cannot let your guard down at all when you head here to the Bay Area. And there's just no shortage of people who have fallen victim to crime around here. And just a few years ago, another News Nation crew hit while leaving the airport. And luckily, our equipment was found and returned in that incident. Adrian?
Quickly, I'm a Northern California native, so I didn't grow up too far from Oakland. I just heard you say Oakland, and that made me think two things.
Yep.
One is Oakland might be even worse than San Francisco in terms of drugs, in terms of people abandoning cars, breaking into cars, sleeping on the streets. Is the legislation that's up for San Francisco, is that going to have any effect on surrounding Bay Area communities?
No, the two items on the ballot for San Francisco voters today, one is Prop B. That would increase the police force up to, I believe, 2,000 within the next 5 years. But that would mean a tax increase for San Franciscans. And there's very low turnout in the primary here in San Francisco. So it remains to be seen what's going to happen with that Prop B. There's also Prop E that's on the ballot here. That would increase police powers to use technology like drones to surveil and chase suspects. So the fate of that also unknown at this point, Adrian.
Yeah, it's just bizarre that even after so many incentives to get out to vote, people still maybe think their vote doesn't count, but it really does, especially this year. Nancy, we're so glad you're safe, and you and your crew continue to be so today. I know you'll be looking, you'll be extra vigilant after what happened. We'll be right back.
Of course. Thank you.
Now to an exclusive report on one of the most controversial issues in medicine. It has the attention of Elon Musk, the billionaire, responding to NewsNation's report that shared newly leaked files from a global organization focusing on gender-affirming care and medical interventions for minors, and indicate that some young patients and their parents might not fully understand the details or the life-altering risks of some of these procedures. This leak is coming from the organization WPATH. It's the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. Many of our institutions here in the U.S. look to this organization for guidance surrounding gender surgeries and all their hormonal procedures. Correspondent Rich McHugh is joining us live. I know you've been following different angles of this story, but what do these files reveal?
Hi, Adrian. So these files are 170 pages of documents, conversations with doctors and therapists associated with this group, WPATH. And they suggest, first of all, they're brought to us by Michael Schellenberger, who was part of the team exposing the Twitter files, which talks about censorship at Twitter. These files call into question whether patients and parents are giving informed consent. Here's a bit of a report from last night. Take a look.
We've got a pediatric endocrinologist who very clearly knows that these young people, these adolescents, cannot understand lifelong sterility. He says when he's talking about fertility preservation with a 13-year-old, it's like talking to a blank wall.
It's always a good theory that you talk about fertility preservation with a 14-year-old, but I know I'm talking to a blank wall. And the same would happen for a cisgender kid, right? They'd be like, ew, kids, babies, gross.
He says, you know, they'll say, ooh, baby's gross, which is, of course, a perfectly natural teenage reaction. I was once a 13-year-old girl. That would have been my reaction. I'm now in my 40s. I have 3 children, and they are my entire life because I was allowed to grow and mature and change. And then this doctor also sees that there's regret because he sees the adolescents when they come back in their 20s and they've met someone and they want to settle down, and he says to them,
I think now that I follow a lot of kids into their mid-20s, I'm always like, oh, the dog isn't doing it for you, right? Yeah, they're like, no, I just found this, wonderful partner and now we're kids and da-da-da. So I think, it doesn't surprise me.
Now, the report also argues that WPATH is pushing, quote, pseudoscientific surgical and hormonal experiments on children, adolescents, and vulnerable adults, and calls on the government to initiate a bipartisan national inquiry and to investigate how activists with little respect for the Hippocratic Oath could have risen to such prominence as to set the standards of care for an entire field of medicine. Now, we reached out to Dr. Marcy Bowers. She is the president of WPATH for an interview. She provided a statement which I'll read in part. She writes, WPATH remains a science and consensus-based organization whose recommendations are widely endorsed by professional medical organizations around the globe. We are the professionals who best know the medical needs of trans and gender diverse individuals and stand opposed to individuals who delegitimize the diverse identities and complex needs of this population. The world is not flat. Gender, like genitalia, is represented by diversity. So, Adrian, this report is getting a lot of attention online in these circles, so expect more on this front soon.
Yeah, there's much more to say about this. Rich, thank you. We'll be right back.
Thank you.
It's It's been a pleasure to be with you this afternoon. I'm Adrienne Bankert, Nicole Burley, back tomorrow. Thanks so much for watching. Connell McShane picking up our coverage now from New York. I just love saying your name, Connell McShane.
That's it. Yeah, you say it with a lot of authority. You can, very well done, Adrienne. Thank you. Good to see you. And welcome, everybody, to Super Tuesday. In America, we have more than 27 million people expected to vote today across 6 different time zones. Now, in the race for president, tonight's widely expected to confirm the general election rematch between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, but it could also expose, as we look at our big board from Decision Desk HQ, the key vulnerabilities for both. And that's one of the things we're going to be watching throughout our coverage all night long tonight. So let's get you ready here. First of all, on the GOP side, delegate count coming in 221 for Trump, only 43 for Nikki Haley. Now, what's at stake in tonight's race? You're talking about 862 delegates in 15 states, so Trump could come very close to wrapping it up if he runs the table, as a lot of people expect him to do. States we'll be watching include Virginia, which closes early. How does he do in the suburbs near Washington, D.C., when you use the word like vulnerabilities? North Carolina is the only true swing state that's really on the map tonight. Speaking of which, we switch over to the Democratic side and get you set for that race tonight. Of course, North Carolina will be a key state there. 862 delegates up for grabs in 15 different states. And, you know, when you look at and think about the Democratic race, Joe Biden, 206 coming in. Uncommitted is currently in second place with 2 delegates. So that brings us to where we might see a protest vote tonight. Maybe Minnesota's a place to watch for that. But again, I think, and we'll go to the prediction map for just a moment, that North Carolina will be the interesting one to watch in terms of swing states. You know, North Carolina, we have 7 swing states on this map right now that are in yellow as I bring it up. When you do that, it's advantage Democrats, 226, 219, 7 on the board. But let's just say, for argument's sake, North Carolina went back and leaned red. Then the Republicans, presumably Donald Trump, would be up 235, 226 with 270 needed to win, and 6 states on the board. So that's kind of your setup for tonight. But the phrase to keep in mind if you're watching us tonight is winner take all. Winner take all. Why? Well, a lot of the states that are reporting tonight are just that, winner take all. The candidate gets all the delegates if they win more than 50% of the votes. The reason they do this, they want to speed things up right ahead of the convention, the delegate process before their convention. And the big ones tonight, whether it's California with 169 delegates or Texas with 161, they're among the states, and there are many others that use that method. That's why we say that Donald Trump, and to the same extent Joe Biden, has a good chance to be well on their way to maybe not technically securing the nomination, but coming very close to doing that. Okay, we have reporters all over the map today. Here they are. So, you know, Emily Finn, Mount Pleasant, South Carolina. Brooke Schaefer's with the Trump folks down there near Mar-a-Lago. And Kelly Meyer at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, which is where we begin. And Kelly, if we talk about a big picture question, what's at stake for President Joe Biden today?
Well, happy Super Tuesday there, Connell. It's certainly a happy Tuesday for President Biden. He's inching closer and closer to becoming the Democratic nominee. He's the presumptive nominee right now, and likely in the next few weeks we'll be able to lock this in. But what we're watching for, and what you mentioned there off the top, is something that we might see today, and that's the protest vote, the casting their ballot for uncommitted to protest Biden's support for Israel and this ongoing humanitarian crisis in Gaza. We saw it in Michigan with more than 100,000 voters casting their ballot for uncommitted. We're watching for it, and as you said, Minnesota and Colorado today. That could be an indication of something that might hurt President Biden as they move into the general election. So that's something he's watching. We've seen here at the White House, the president and the White House taking a more firmer stance against Israel on this, in the sense of they're still supporting Israel, but they're saying, you know, let more pathways open. And we heard that from the Secretary of Defense really just moments ago, meeting with the Israeli War Cabinet member Benny Gantz. He said he expressed strong concerns over the humanitarian situation in Gaza and requested Minister Gantz support in enabling more humanitarian assistance and distribution into Gaza. So you're seeing this bit of a shift in the messaging from the administration as they're seeing an impact at the polls. Connell.
And in terms of locking up the nomination, technically, we talked about it with Trump. For Biden, it probably won't happen tonight, but, you know, we know he's going to be the nominee unless something happens, but that doesn't technically happen tonight, right?
Yeah. Right. It all signs indicate that these are going to be our 2 nominees. This is going to be a rematch of 2020. for Trump, likely might lock this in over the next week or so, maybe March 12th, and then a week after for President Biden. So likely in the month of March, we're going to see that these guys are going to be these nominees going forward. Then the general election kicks into gear. We saw that when we were in South Carolina, though, with the signs Trump had out there, fire Biden. So he's already moving into the general election. And we're seeing Biden as well. He's preparing his speech for the State of the Union, laying out his pitch to the American people, why he should be president again for another 4 years, saying his accomplishments and his priorities for the remainder of his term, and he's going to hit the road and sell that immediately after, going to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania on Friday, and then Atlanta, Georgia on Saturday. We're hearing from our sources at the White House that he is going to be amping up his travel, meeting voters where they are, and focusing on that message as he moves into the general election.
And that might be the big night, you're right, for Biden to get Super Tuesday is one thing, but State of the Union Thursday, the big political test for the sitting president. There's Kelly Meyer live on the North Lawn of the White House. All right, let's shift it south and talk to Brooke Schaefer for a moment. She's been covering the Trump campaign and joins us from very close to his Mar-a-Lago estate there in Palm Beach. So what would you say coming in terms of the Trump folks and what they expect tonight?
Well, Connell, senior advisors to the former president have told us that they are expecting a Super Tuesday sweep for former President Donald Trump. Trump overnight telling his supporters on Truth Social to get out and vote. He says that he really wants Super Tuesday to be a signal that the, quote, freight train is coming. And you heard Kelly saying that President Joe Biden already really looking towards the general election. So is former President Donald Trump. He really has the momentum behind him today. Of course, he has won all but one primary, and so he has that delegate math on his side. Of course, Team Trump looking to add to that today with a potential sweep on this Super Tuesday. They've long said that Nikki Haley doesn't have the delegate math to continue in this race. Today, they are hoping to solidify that messaging. But as they are doing that, again, the former president really focusing on November and the general election. In a lot of his recent stops, he hasn't even mentioned Nikki Haley. He has sort of dodged some questions about her in recent interviews. Instead, he's really focused on policy, things like the economy and immigration. Of course, as you're seeing, he was at the border just last week, a dueling visit at the same time as President Joe Biden. Former President Trump is going to watch all of this play out from his home here in Palm Beach, Florida, here at Mar-a-Lago. He's expected to make a speech with supporters in the room later tonight. Connell?
So Super Tuesday speech at Mar-a-Lago, then what? What's next for Trump after tonight?
Yeah, we know the former president's already focused on Georgia. Their primary is 1 week from today. He has a stop in Rome, Georgia on Saturday, the same day as President Joe Biden. He's going to be about an hour and a half away just outside Atlanta. So again, it seems like everything is signaling a real focus shift to the general election and November for Team Trump.
All right, Brooke Schaefer with the Trump folks there in Palm Beach. Thank you, Brooke. Next up for us, Emily Finn on the Nikki Haley side of things. There's Emily in the state of South Carolina. Could be a last stand of sorts for the Haley campaign tonight. What about the final pitch she's making to Republican voters?
Yeah, Connell, this is an absolutely crucial day for the Nikki Haley campaign, a bit of a make or break it moment. She has indicated that as long as she is staying competitive, that she has no intention of bowing out of this race, but it's kind of unclear how she defines that word, competitive. But what is very, very clear is that Super Tuesday is the most competitive day in the primary election cycle. And so she is going to have a pretty decent showing today in order to stay in the race. She has had some aggressive campaign moves in the days leading up to Super Tuesday. After her only win in the primary so far in D.C., she embarked on this tour of a few of the Super Tuesday states. She was in New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Maine, Vermont, ended the day in Texas last night, where she was speaking in Fort Worth, telling voters that she believes she is the best candidate to go on to beat Biden in the general election. We look at potential matchups. She does beat him by a sizable percentage. But former President Trump still, as Brooke just mentioned, has such a lead here. He's been really dominating in most of these primaries so far. So it's going to be, like I said, a crucial make or break it day for Nikki Haley.
It will indeed. Now we know what's next for the other two. The question for Haley will be when or if she decides to leave the race. All right, Emily, thank you. Emily Finn with the Haley campaign. And we have a lot more of our Super Tuesday coverage coming up, but we're also watching this. The United States airdropping more aid into Gaza today. Latest live from the Middle East as the humanitarian crisis there deepens by the day. We'll be right back. U.S. airdropping more aid into Gaza today. We can see civilians scrambling to just kind of grab what they can. This comes as negotiators work to get a ceasefire deal done before Ramadan, which is now just days away. NewsNation's Robert Sherman with the latest live from Tel Aviv tonight. Robert?
Hey there, Connell. So obviously there's a lot of pressure and there's a lot of focus on that deadline, which you mentioned, Ramadan, which is March 10th, but more pointedly is Sunday. It's approaching us rather quickly here. So you have all of these different forces that are trying to get some kind of a deal done. The U.S. has been putting pressure on Israel, and you've also seen that pressure mounting on the ground here. But as we stand, Connell, there are a lot of hardline stances, the sticking points that we have been bringing up. They're still sticking at this hour. Hamas says that the only situation in which they're going to release hostages are if they get a deal which will start the process of ending the war. And once Israel withdraws all of their troops from the Gaza Strip, Israel says there is absolutely no chance that that is going to happen. Conversely, Israel is demanding that Hamas provide them with a list of hostages who are alive and who are dead. They do not know that information right now. And at this point, Hamas has not provided it and says they won't provide it unless a truce is agreed upon. So you have both of these sides who are standing tall here, but you had meetings today with Qatari's foreign minister, or with Qatari's leadership, as well as the U.S. To try and get a deal done. So all of these forces are trying to come to some kind of an agreement here. But at this point, there's definitely a lot of heels being dug in the sand right now.
You were just showing video, Robert, from Tel Aviv, which is, of course, where you're reporting from. Is that a protest related to the hostages, or?
Yeah, so this was a demonstration that was taking place outside of the U.S. Embassy branch office here in Tel Aviv. You know, people waving American flags. Something that we've noticed on the ground here, Connell, is that in recent days, we have seen a lot of these demonstrations, which have been ongoing for months, start to put a focus on calling to the U.S. to take action and do more. As some here believe that President Biden and the U.S. leadership is their best chance at getting a hostage deal in order to get their loved ones home. It is an interesting political feeling on the ground here, Connell, is that you look at the meeting with Benny Gantz in Washington yesterday. At the beginning of the war, the message was unity, push forward, push political differences aside. But you talk to people here in Israel, there are rumblings about, could some of that unity be fracturing? Could the government maybe not be capable of meeting the ends that the people want them to meet? So there's a lot of discussions about that taking place here. Bottom line, people want their loved ones to come home any way possible.
Of course. Connell. Robert, thank you. Robert Sherman live in Tel Aviv. Let's talk about this. And retired Brigadier General Mark Kimmett joins us, former Assistant Secretary of State under President George W. Bush. Thank you, General, for joining us. I want to go to Vice President Harris, who's been vocal about this throughout the week, and listen to what she said about the possibility of a hostage deal and a ceasefire. Here's the Vice President.
And has been an extraordinary leader in getting us to this point that we have this 6-week deal. Far too many Palestinian civilians, innocent civilians, have been killed. We need to get more aid in. We need to get the hostages out. We're in a window of time right now where we can actually get a hostage deal done. We all want this conflict to end as soon as possible.
What about that window of time? I think the Ramadan's been mentioned, as Robert reported, begins Sunday, March 10th. What do you think happens here?
Well, I think Robert's right. There's very little chance, in my mind, save a significant concession on either the Hamas side or the Israeli side, that there's going to be any type of significant deal done before Sunday.
Do you think that UN report, if you saw that yesterday, we talked about it briefly on the show, it was just coming out, had any impact on the way the Israelis are negotiating this deal? There was, for those who didn't see it, the UN team found reasonable grounds to believe sexual violence occurred during the October 7th attack. I think a lot of people thought that was the case, but the UN confirms it. I want to go to Avi Hyman for a moment, National Public Diplomacy Directorate, responding to that by saying this. Let's listen.
Israel calls for the immediate convening of the UN Security Council with the aim of designating Hamas as a terrorist organization. The United Nations must impose international sanctions on Hamas.
What do you think the impact of that was, if anything, on the dynamic in the negotiations?
I don't think it had any effect in the least. I mean, this is something that was generally understood on both sides. But look, let's be very clear. People are trying to get ahead of Prime Minister Netanyahu. He is sticking to his war aims, which is the return of the hostages, defeat, destruction of Hamas, and destruction of the terrorist infrastructure. It is many of his opponents that are scaling back on those war aims, and Prime Minister Netanyahu sticking to those war aims, right or wrong. That is where we find ourselves today. And he has a significant amount of the Israeli population that agrees with him. So I don't think that there's going to be any breakthrough, and I don't think that there are any concessions that are going to be offered by Netanyahu in this short term either.
What about the dynamic inside the Israeli government? A lot's been made of Benny Gantz, who had run against Netanyahu, coming here, meeting with the vice president this week. I want to put up a headline from Axios that talked about how he was lambasted at the White House about the war strategy. The quote in there was that the aid convoy disaster from last Thursday in Gaza, during which more than 100 Palestinians were killed, that was seen as a turning point for the Biden administration. Then Gantz comes in, and you're still saying Netanyahu has a lot of support. It's not fracturing a bit?
Well, certainly his political support is fracturing, but at the end of the day, that's a parliamentary democracy. Right. There will be a majority that pushes him out. So, look, the unsaid truth is a significant number, if not the majority of Israelis, agree with what Prime Minister Netanyahu is. They are not invoking 9/11. They're invoking December 7th, 1941. Nobody was asking for the Americans to a ceasefire 5 months after the Japanese had attacked Pearl Harbor. Nobody held back on us and said we were violating the rules of war. Nobody said to us there was anything wrong with the destruction of the Japanese empire, one that we dropped 2 atomic bombs on. That's the thinking that Netanyahu's going on. And he's thinking also that if he does not finish his job, that will just simply be work left to one of his successors when Hamas attacks again in the future.
Yeah,
so,
I just wonder if he's more alone in that thinking, or more lonely in that thinking than he was. You know, in other words, there seems like there's more voices speaking up all around the world that, you know, wouldn't really be radical voices, more moderate voices that are saying, you know what, I know the attack was terrible, the response needed to be strong, but maybe this is a bit too much.
Well, I sure wish they had told that to the American Marines before they had to run up Iwo Jima.
Don't you think, is the comparison the same? You know, like, haven't we evolved at all, though, over the however many years? Or you look at it the exact same way as we would from, you know, World War II and past conflicts?
Well, it's certainly the case that I don't necessarily believe that we should be operating outside the rules of war. Right. But if you look at the way the Russians are fighting inside of Ukraine, candidly, the way the Ukrainians are responding to that fighting, I think we have just got to recognize that while we think we have become more evolved in the nature of warfare, the attack on October 7th demonstrated that Hamas certainly doesn't think that way. And I think the response since October 7th, 27th, has meant that Israel doesn't think that way. This is still very Hobbesian, nasty and brutish, and unfortunately in this case, not very short. Right. So while we would think that all these international conventions have somehow turned us into more enlightened civilians, I don't know what we'd do if all of a sudden we had 3,000 people killed by a terrorist attack coming out of Mexico.
Now, I understand. So that the takeaway then from your comments is this is going to go on a while. This is the, you know, we're in the early stages. Yeah.
Yeah, I went high and right and drifted a little bit, but I just don't think either side is anywhere near anything other than a very, very temporary ceasefire. And I certainly don't think we'll have it by Sunday.
All right. General Kimmett, always appreciate your analysis and expertise. Thank you, sir.
All right, Colonel.
Coming up, we will have the latest on those deadly wildfires we've been covering. They continue to blaze through the Texas Panhandle. An update from Governor Abbott on that after a quick break here on News Nation Now. We'll be right back. All right, back on News Nation Now. A civilian employee for the Air Force charged with illegally sending out classified information about the Russian war in Ukraine, doing so via foreign dating website. David Slater, former Army Lieutenant Colonel, who held a top secret security clearance, sent National Defense information to a woman who referred to the 63-year-old as her, quote, secret informant love and also secret agent. In some of these messages, prosecutors released the unnamed woman and Slater discussed NATO, they discussed weapons, discussed military targets even. Now, if he ends up being convicted on these charges, he could face up to 10 years in prison. Celebrations in Paris as France becomes the first country in the world to put the right to abortion in its constitution. So we have the details on that and more in our headlines today from around the world.
Armed gangs in Haiti tried to seize control of the country's international airport, exchanging gunfire with troops and police. The airport was closed at the time. Now, Haiti's been under a state of emergency since Sunday after a mass prison break freed thousands of inmates. Gangs, unified under a leader known as Barbecue, have staged multiple attacks in an effort to overthrow Haiti's unstable government. International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants for 2 high-ranking Russian military officers accused of war crimes in Ukraine. One commands the Russian Navy's Black Sea Fleet, the other a bomber unit, the Russian Air Force. They're wanted for attacks on Ukraine's civilian infrastructure. The court previously issued an arrest warrant for the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, accusing him of abducting children from Ukraine. And France has now become the first country in the world to enshrine the right to abortion in its constitution. The country's parliament passed the measure by a wide margin, 780 to 72, with Paris erupting in celebration after the vote. Now, abortion's been legal in France since 1974, but leaders pushed for constitutional protections after Roe v. Wade was overturned in the U.S.
And there's new fallout today to a NewsNation exclusive report on one of the most controversial issues in medicine. In fact, Elon Musk is weighing in on this. Musk responding to the reporting from our own Rich McHugh on these leaked files from the world's leading transgender healthcare organization indicating their young patients may not understand what exactly they're signing up for. Musk had called all of this, quote, concerning. Let's bring Rich in on this and continue with his reporting that started on Elizabeth Vargas' program last night. So, all right, Elon Musk is talking about this, but if we can back up for a moment and talk about what happened here. In his post that I saw, he was responding to a guy named Michael Schellenberger. Right, Rich?
That's right, Connell. So Michael Schellenberger, journalist, he was part of the team of journalists who exposed or was reported the Twitter files. If you remember the Twitter files, that was about censorship within Twitter. Michael Schellenberger and Mia Hughes was the lead author on the WPATH files. Now, WPATH is a organization that focuses on transgender health around the world. Let's put it that way. The WPATH files are 170 pages of documents, conversations with doctors and therapists within WPATH, and they're talking about certain cases, and they're going through trial and scenarios. What this reveals is that, or that they say it reveals, is that these patients that are undergoing these procedures and their parents might not be giving informed consent. Here's a little part of it. Take a look.
This doctor also sees that there's regret because he sees the adolescents when they come back in their 20s and they've met someone and they want to settle down, and he says to them,
I think now that I follow a lot of kids into their mid-20s, I'm always like, oh, the dog isn't doing it for you, right? Yeah, they're like, no, I just found this, wonderful partner and now we're kids and da-da-da. So I think, it doesn't surprise me.
The report also argues WPATH is pushing, quote, pseudoscientific surgical and hormonal experiments on children, adolescents, and vulnerable adults, and calls on the government to initiate a bipartisan national inquiry to investigate how activists with little respect for the Hippocratic Oath could have risen to such prominence as to set the standards of care for an entire field of medicine. We asked Dr. Marcy Bowers, president of WPATH, for an interview. She provided a statement which I'll read in part. WPATH remains a science and consensus-based organization whose recommendations are widely endorsed by professional medical organizations around the globe. We are the professionals who best know the medical needs of trans and gender-diverse individuals and stand opposed to individuals who delegitimize the diverse identities and complex needs of this population, Connell.
All right, so a lot there, Rich, obviously, and a lot of this comes down to, as it says on the screen now, to consent, to what parents have have consented to or what they know about. We know you'll continue reporting on this story, and as I said, a lot of people talking about it, including Elon Musk, apparently. Rich McHugh. An update to come on the Scott Peterson case. You remember how the LA Innocence Project started looking into it? Well, find out what a judge now is saying about Peterson's murder conviction. We have that next. All right, let's get to Texas now, where firefighters have managed to get to about 37% containment on that Smokehouse Creek fire. Still 5 active fires in the Panhandle, though, so we bring you there with NewsNation's Stephanie Haynes. All right, so I think Governor Abbott just finished speaking about all this, right? So let's start there, Stephanie.
Yeah, we just walked out of that briefing, and we are learning so much more, Connell, about the size, the scope, and the extent of the damage of these wildfires in Hemphill County, where I'm standing right now. That's just one of the counties where the fires have really made an impact. 70% of this county is burned, according to the governor, and 47 families have had their homes reduced to ashes. They have nowhere to live now. And the governor also told this harrowing story of a local hospital where they evacuated 66 patients twice. And then in a neighboring county, some really sad news to report that the governor addressed right away, that a local volunteer fire chief has died after responding to a structure fire in Hutchinson County. Now, we do not know at this point if the wildfires are the cause of that fire, but the governor was very adamant in saying that this fire chief is a Texas hero, that he died in the line of duty, and he put his life on the line. So really sad update there when it comes to what is happening here on the ground, Connell.
Oh, terrible stuff, in addition to all that's been lost in terms of property and farms and all the rest of it. Was it 5 now, or is it 5 now active fires? Is that where we are? And what do we know about containment for all of them?
Yeah, well, there is some good news here, because the Magenta fire was one of the fires, the smaller of them, who is a little bit out west. That is 100% contained. So that means that they have this perimeter around the fire, and they do not they're not worried that those flames will jump that perimeter right now. It doesn't mean the flames are out, but it's 100% contained. Smokehouse Creek fire, however, the one that's the largest in state history, more than 1 million acres burned, that is 37% contained, as you said. That is a big jump from yesterday. It was 15% contained. They have a perimeter, the governor says, of 550 miles around the Smokehouse Creek fire. Just to give you a sense of how big that is basically from Dallas to Kansas City, and then like 50 or so extra miles. That is how big the perimeter is. It's really hard to wrap your mind around this, but listen, again, containment is progressing. That is good. The firefighters are holding the line, as they have really been working hard to do. It's just that these fires are not out, and the weather here, while there might be some rain, forecasters say later in the week, there is still that fire danger out there. So they're wanting people, no new burns, no new jumping, please be vigilant, because this isn't over. And then here's the other thing, Connell. We have recovery going on as these fires are still burning. So there is this desperate need for hay, desperate for all of these ranchers who have lost their land and really need to feed their cattle. That is a huge part of the economy here, and there are real concerns about the future of the economy going forward, Connell.
Understandably, a huge part of the economy. You're right about that. Stephanie, thanks. Stephanie Haynes covering the wildfires in Texas for us. One person killed in explosions at a massive fire Monday that took place at a warehouse. This was outside Detroit. A series of blasts sending debris flying as far as a mile away. Now, officials are saying a 19-year-old died after being struck by a canister about a quarter mile away. Residents urged to stay inside until the fire was brought under control. It destroyed a building in Clinton Township that houses supplies for the vaping industry. Now, violent crime. You talk about violent crime. The place we've really seen it surging is in our nation's capital. The homicides there up 30% last year. Leaders in the District of Columbia have been, some might say, slow to respond, despite the calls we've had from residents, certainly, to do more. NewsNation's Evan Lambert's been covering this. He's on it again today. I know the council there is expected to vote on a crime bill. Right, bring us up to speed of what's happening in D.C.
Hey, Connell. Yeah, so the D.C. Council should get started very soon on discussing this crime bill. This is the second vote. The last vote was nearly unanimous, so this is expected to pass. But it is quite a flip-flop from where the D.C. Council was just about 4 years ago, when they largely embraced a lot of these progressive policies in light of the crime that we were seeing. But what has been different over this last year is, as you mentioned, that surge in both homicides and violent crime that we've seen in the nation's capital. And it has been, in fact, out of step with the rest of the country. So that really has brought people's extra attention to it, especially people here living here in Washington, D.C. That this bill really seems like a direct response to the anger, the frustration, the fear that residents have been expressing over the last year. When I talk about the bill, it does have some really important provisions that are supposed to be aimed at taking on this crime wave really up front. One of the things that it does is that it tightens penalties for gun crimes. It also expands the definition of carjacking. We've been telling you about the carjacking really epidemic that's been going on here in the nation's capital, especially last year with over 950 carjackings for 2023. And so it expands that definition to include more crimes that can be considered under the carjacking umbrella. Also, it allows judges to hold more people charged with violent crimes in detention ahead of their trials. So these are things that especially the Public Safety Committee chairperson who brought this bill forward is saying is going to address some of that crime surge we saw over the last year head on. You also have the mayor, Mayor Muriel Bowser, here supporting this bill, and the U.S. Attorney's Office, the prosecutors for local crimes here in D.C. I spoke with a supervisor in that office last week, and she was telling me about why her office is behind this bill. Take a listen to some of that.
I think Secure DC as a package has a lot of great tools for prosecutors to attack a lot of different crimes in a lot of different ways, which is why the U.S. Attorney's Office is very supportive and hopes that Secure DC passes. And organized retail theft is just one of the many things that's a part of Secure DC.
And Connell, you hit on some of the context here, but last year homicides were up 35%, violent crime in the district up 39%. So that is the reaction from residents that this bill is aimed at targeting. Again, expected to pass. Connell.
All right, we'll follow it. And again, to your point, out of step with the rest of the country. That's what really stands out about Washington, D.C. here lately on crime, which Evan's been covering. And now we do have some developing news we want to move on to right now, where News Nation has learned here moments ago that there was a man who was on the terror watch list and was arrested while crossing the border. So Allie Bradley brings us that story, joins us now with the latest on that. What can you tell us, Allie?
Yeah, hey, Connell. So our DHS sources were just able to confirm that this 40-year-old man from Colombia actually entered into the United States through the Rio Grande and into the Eagle Pass area on February 21st. Now, he was picked up by DPS, initially by Texas DPS. This is according to my sources here, and they actually turned him over to Border Patrol. So we're talking about 40-year-old Carlos Obed Yepes Bedoya. Again, he's from Colombia, and he was turned over to Border Patrol for processing. Now, they brought him to the soft-sided facility here, which is called Firefly, and he was processed. That's when they're going to do fingerprint scanning and the facial recognition. And that's when we talk about, Connell, if they have not committed a crime here or don't flag on the terrorist watch list, we wouldn't know that they've committed a crime, right? Well, this guy, he did flag on that terrorist watch list, so they were able to identify him. Now, he has a detainer right now after being, he has an immigration detainer due to the fact that he was turned over to the U.S. Marshals for criminal proceedings. So what he told Border Patrol upon apprehension was that he was heading to an address in Houston. Now, we have some statistics, too, about the terrorist watch list encounters here, Connell. 66 on the southern border this fiscal year. That just started on October 1st. That is happening at and between the ports of entry, just at the southern border here. That is on pace to match last year's number. Now, I do want to bring this up as well because I was digging around a little bit to see kind of when the last time was that we saw a situation like this. I have one a little bit better, Connell, if you will. Back in June of 2023, ICE actually, CBP released a migrant on the terrorist watch list. And the OIG, the Office of Inspector General, actually flagged this within DHS as a problem where ICE was having communication issues, sharing challenges that they were having, not able to communicate amongst different agencies. So that's something that we see regularly. And here's something else I want to note here, Connell. When these individuals are in our custody, it's usually around 72 hours. They have to go through multiple databases, and some of these databases take 3 or more days to flag. So if that happens, those individuals might be released onto the streets. We've seen this happen. ICE has to go down and track them down and apprehend them. And that is the reality down here at the southern border, Connell.
All right, good reporting from Allie Bradley on that developing story. Thank you, Allie. Now, we get back to our Super Tuesday coverage. It's about more than just the presidential race. In fact, one of the most watched contests is the California Senate race. We're going to break that down, what it can mean for the future of the Senate as we continue. Super Tuesday on News Nation Now. We're back in a moment, live from here in New York. Don't go away. Well, after 20 years in prison, the convicted murderer Scott Peterson's been granted a new status hearing from a judge in California. He was convicted of killing his pregnant wife, Lacey, back in 2004. But now his case being taken up by the Los Angeles Innocence Project as they look to present evidence they think could clear him. So News Nation's Laura Ingalls been covering this case, well, since then, and joins us now. All right. What's the latest?
Well, we're going to go to California on Tuesday. There are a lot of key questions about the evidence in this case and about the discovery here in this case for these attorneys. But the biggest question involved here in this petition really to the court is, will it be enough? This major development comes less than 2 months after Scott Peterson's new attorneys, who you mentioned with the Los Angeles Innocence Project, filed this motion to ask the courts to reopen the files on this 2 decades old case. Now, the hearing that is scheduled 1 week from today will bring those LAIP attorneys to court to ask a judge to allow them to have evidence in the case reevaluated, claiming that Scott Peterson's state and federal constitutional rights were violated and that there is new evidence, which raises many questions about who they say abducted and killed Lacey Peterson and her unborn child Connor on Christmas Eve 2002. You'll remember their bodies were found along the San Francisco shoreline roughly 4 months after Lacey was reported missing. And we went back to Modesto in January to show our viewers the crux of Peterson's defense, an alleged connection to a burglary that took place right across the street from the Petersons' former home. And Peterson's attorneys have always claimed that Lacey may have stumbled across a burglary in progress that turned violent while she was out walking their dog. And that time frame was also right around when Scott Peterson says he left his home to go fishing in the San Francisco Bay. These attorneys have also raised questions about that burned out orange van. Remember, we told you about that was found just 1 mile away from the Petersons' home Christmas morning of 2002, which contained a mattress with possible blood stains that Peterson's attorneys say were never fully tested. And attorneys for Peterson are also looking for interviews from witnesses who say they saw Lacey walking her dog after Scott left their home. And they're also looking for videotaped interviews as well. So there's a lot that they want to get to, but the very fact that a judge said, okay, I'm going to listen to you, is a really big deal in this case.
That raises the likelihood of a new trial, or where are we on that?
A possibility. I mean, if this judge says, let's look and let's retest, and there's something there, then we're looking at the possibility of a new trial.
All right, we'll look for you in California next week. Till then, thank you. Laura Ingalls on that story. As we continue here, much more to come on News Nation Now. We'll go by the numbers on this Super Tuesday as our special coverage, by the way, begins tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Look at that motley crew. Wow, that's it. So, well, it's looked pretty good next to Star Wars, don't you think?
Yeah, you do.
All right. That's the coverage at 7 o'clock, and we'll be back with more in just a moment. All right, it's a Super Tuesday theme, which I guess makes sense as we go by the numbers. You see the states here on Super Tuesday that we'll be watching as the results come in that special coverage that I was referencing last night. Now, if you want to talk about this in numbers, there are 16 states taking part. American Samoa is holding its Democratic contest today. 854 of the more than 2,400 delegates are at stake on the Republican side today. 854 for the GOP. As for the Democrats, 1,420. Now, our projections from a Decision Desk HQ, 27 million Americans or thereabouts are expected to vote today. So it's a big day for a lot of people around the country. And there's a 40-40 club. That's what we're calling it. These states hold a combined 40% of the country's employed workers, so 40% of the combined workers. And they also account for more than 40% of the economy, more than 40% of U.S. gross domestic
product in these states today. So that's why it's such an important day for these states. We go back to the map on Super Tuesday. I think early in the night when the results start to come in, we'll be looking certainly in Virginia to see if we get an early indication, 7 p.m. hour Eastern time, of how the states are going. North Carolina right below that is all the real true swing state that's on the map for the presidential side. But there are a lot of other storylines that'll be developing throughout the evening, and we'll cover it all for you. In fact, it's not just the presidential race. In fact, we'll be talking here in a moment about some of the key Senate races in Texas, which you see on the board there, and out west in California, they have Senate primaries where we could get an idea of what's in store for November as well. Texas race is interesting. Democrats always think they have a better chance than they end up having at the end of the day, usually in Texas. Maybe this is their year. Out in California, you have the former baseball player Steve Garvey on the Republican side of the race. We'll get into that in detail as well. All right, so that's by the numbers. Let's get into our second hour of coverage here on News Nation Now. It's always great to have you with us. I'm Connell McShane. It is time for our top stories as things stand at the top of the hour here on News Nation Now.
So, President, what's your message to Democrats who are concerned about your poll numbers?
My poll numbers, the last 5 polls you guys don't report, I'm winning 5 in a row.
All right. Well, that was President Biden earlier today. As his own assessment of the polls. He's been behind a lot of the polls, but he says he's ahead, and that's his take on his own campaign on this Tuesday afternoon. Now, it's not just any Tuesday, as we've been saying. It's Super Tuesday. You have 31 primaries and caucuses combined between Democrats and Republicans. We'll be watching them all. We'll be watching them all night long. Now, we do have those Senate contests that we're going to monitor tonight. We're going to look at Texas. We're going to look closely as well at California. Now, crime is on the ballot this year in that California race. In fact, our reporter Nancy Liu was looking into that particular story angle for us when she and her crew became part of the story out in San Francisco. We'll check in with Nancy. Let's also at this hour take a live look at the close on Wall Street. We're just seconds past the 4 o'clock hour on the East Coast, and settling in a little bit lower on the day, or maybe more than a little bit. We're 1% down across the board on all 3 major averages. The Dow down by 404, almost 405 points. You know, stocks are kind of sharing the spotlight today a little bit with Bitcoin. See, Bitcoin earlier today, it surged to a new record high, and Doug Flynn will break it all down for us here in a few minutes. Other stories. We know about the mother, now the father of the Oxford high school shooter facing charges. Jury selection today in the James Crumley trial. We'll have Ashley Banfield on that, and also Ashley will have a preview of tonight's episode of Crime Nation.
Lori's husband, Charles, is not quite as engaged in Lori's beliefs, but he is supportive.
I told Charles if they're not having an affair, they're getting ready to. I can tell you that much.
A lot more on Crime Nation to come with Ashley, but right now it's News Nation's Joe Khalil who kicks off our reporting this hour, live from Burbank, California. And Joe's looking at that Senate race. We're going to talk about Texas in a moment, but set the stage for us in California.
Yeah, so this is a really interesting one that we're watching now. You got 3 very popular Democrats here in the state of California: Adam Schiff, Katie Porter, Barbara Lee, and then you've got the Republican who's been running well ahead of his expectations from the beginning, Steve Garvey, obviously someone very well known in California for his baseball background on the Dodgers and the Padres. Conventional wisdom, because this is such a blue state here, you might imagine that this would be maybe a 2-person race between Schiff, who's been just a juggernaut when it comes to fundraising and his polling, and then Katie Porter. But it's actually been Garvey, the Republican, who's been running second for a number of weeks now. And I just talked to some Garvey campaign folks. They feel pretty good about where they are. There's a question about whether he's been doing well or whether it's because Adam Schiff has sort of intentionally been propping Garvey up. You've seen a number of ads. Every voter behind us coming in, I'm sure, have seen these, because millions of dollars were poured into ads that basically made this a 2-person race between Schiff and Garvey. Those were Adam Schiff ads. And you've got a lot of the Katie Porter folks saying, wait a minute, this is PAC money that is sort of trying to box her out. Because remember, this is a jungle primary, meaning the top 2 vote getters today are the only ones that advance to November. So if you've got an Adam Schiff and a Republican like Garvey, it's going to be really hard for Garvey to win in November. No Republican besides Arnold Schwarzenegger has won in the last 25 years here in California. So there was some concern over that. We're going to be watching that dynamic. Right now, Porter and Garvey for that second place spot are polling very close to each other. He does have a slight lead in most average of polls, Connell. So we're going to be watching as we get results tonight whether that remains.
Joe, stay with me. Don't go anywhere, but you're going to have to sit through a little bit of me playing around with our DDHQ board, where I'll be all night long looking at the results. We spent a lot of time on the presidential race with these prediction, scenarios that we have, but now it's the Senate. And look what's interesting about the Senate when Joe's talking about how things shape up in California. In our base model, we already have it 50 to 45, right? GOP, top right, 50, Dems, 45. So essentially what we're saying here is that with 5 toss-up Senate races on the board, the Republicans are already at 50. So Democrats would have to run the table, win the presidency, so that the vice president could break a tie in order to keep control of the Senate. So if you went out to California, just for argument's sake, and Steve Garvey, the baseball player, pulled an Arnold Schwarzenegger, and this started to lean back to the red, then it would almost be impossible for Democrats to keep control of the Senate. But we had that in dark blue because, as Joe says, the expectation is at the end of the day, Schiff or a Democrat ends up winning in the general. The other state we'll watch, though, is Texas. We have it shaded in pink. As I said a few minutes ago, the Democrats for years now have been hoping that maybe Texas is purple. Maybe one of these days it leans blue with a guy like a Colin Allred. We'll talk about it in a moment. If it did, then the Democrats would have a much better map. Right now, the map doesn't look very favorable to them, but they would love to flip a huge state like Texas. We'll leave it shaded in pink for now. That's our base case, 50 to 45. All right, let's talk about this a little bit now. In addition to Joe Khalil right now, we have Chris Tomlinson from the Houston Chronicle with us, and they both join the program. Joe, stand by. Chris, thanks for joining. Let's start and talk a little bit about Texas. Am I right that the Democrats have always had this on their list? And I don't know if this is finally the year, but it's as I can see by the way you're chuckling, this become an open secret, open joke in politics. Oh, one of these years, Texas won't be red anymore. What do you say?
Well, I've been hearing that story for 20 years, yeah. And and the argument has always been that somehow the demographics were going to change Texas in a way that was going to fundamentally favor the Democratic Party, and we're not there yet. On the other hand, Ted Cruz is not exactly a popular figure in Texas. I think Republicans back him and they support him, but he's not well loved. And so if there's a Republican who can lose this year, it would be him.
So Colin Allred, I mentioned, has got an NFL background, right? He's kind of an interesting candidate. So if he wins and is heading up against Cruz in the fall, you wrote a piece for the Houston Chronicle, which was headlined Biden and Trump in Texas to play political games over the border and immigration. So we covered that last week as well. What about immigration and how it might change the dynamic of this race, make it more or less likely, Chris, that it's actually in play?
Well, it's interesting because Colin Allred has said very little about immigration on the campaign trail. It's certainly an issue that divides Democrats deeply. Ted Cruz has always been a hawk on the issue. He's always opposed any form of amnesty, including any potential amnesty for the Dreamers, the immigrants brought here as children. I would expect Cruz to make this a big issue and ride on Donald Trump's coattails.
Let me bring Joe in on this for a moment, because in California, it's interesting. And Joe, by the way, worked as a local reporter out in, I believe, Sacramento, but worked in California for a number of years as well. So it's good to have you out there covering this race for us now. So, you talk about immigration. That's an issue, I would say, in California. And also crime is probably on the ballot there as well. What have you been hearing from people since you've been back out there in terms of how that affects this Senate contest?
So definitely crime is something that is a concern. Cost of living, for sure, here in California, significantly higher. In some cases, when you run the numbers, it could be up to 50% higher than the average around the country. And then certainly immigration as well. And I think one of the points that we heard back in the most recent debate that these candidates we've been mentioning made was that they were asked whether they would support President Biden taking executive action on immigration. You talked to Barbara Lee. She's sort of a progressive in her own right, and so take her out of the conversation. But the other three, 2 Democrats and a Republican, all said that they would support President Biden taking the executive action. And the consideration is not just providing legal pathways, but we're talking about adding more border wall potentially, making it tougher to apply for asylum. So if you talk about the politics nationally changing on that issue, Connell, again, very, very blue California, this liberal bastion here, the top candidates who are running for the Senate seat all saying that we need some executive action on immigration tells you that it certainly has shifted, not just around the country, not just in Texas, but even in a place like California.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned the candidates who are running. So you got Adam Schiff, everybody I think knows about nationally, high profile, impeachment and everything else. But Katie Porter and Barbara Lee in the Congress are both to his left or seen as running from his left. And now there's this, and you touched a little bit on this in your report, but dig into it a little bit more if you can. Steve Garvey, played for the Dodgers, also played for the Padres, so, he's popular in terms of where he's well known in California. So he's running as the Republican. Is it true what's going on out there? Is Schiff spending money attacking Garvey to make him even better known and more of a kind of a viable candidate because he'd rather run against him? Is that what's going on?
You talk to people who support Adam Schiff, they say no, he's just running a normal campaign. But if you sort of read between the lines there, and the Katie Porter folks certainly believe this is the case as well, many of his ads in the final sprint, the final month, and I think there was a $10 million ad buy, had Schiff talking about how this race was between him and between Steve Garvey, who represents the Donald Trump wing of the Republican Party. It's a race between that and between Trump. Now, Garvey has been sort of Trump agnostic, I think, as one profile I read on him said, or maybe he describes himself that way. But you can see Schiff sort of painting the race as a two-person race. Right. And when you hear the names over and over and over again, you can make the argument that you are raising the profile and you are sort of trying to box out who might be a much more competitive one-on-one race with Katie Porter in November. Because, again, if you're running Adam Schiff versus generic Republican, whoever it may be, there may be a ceiling in California for a Republican. So it is an easier race, and I think certainly you look at the ads, I think they speak for themselves. Well,
that's why we had California in dark blue, whereas, Chris, we had Texas in kind of a lighter red. But we'll end with you on that. You don't. You said you've been thinking about it for 20-plus years or covering and being asked about it. This isn't the year, is it? Or is it for the Democrats in Texas?
I don't think so. No. Not with Donald Trump at the top of the ticket. He is immensely popular with the GOP base here. He will turn out the voters who are fired up about immigration, and Ted Cruz will just ride that coattail.
So everything's big in Texas, and California's pretty big itself. So we covered the two big states. Chris and Joe, thanks to both. Super Tuesday coverage continues here on News Nation Now, and we have the Biden administration as well proposing an $8 cap on credit card late fees. That's in the business news today. What it all means. Doug Flynn on that and more. Plus, it's not only Tuesday, it's Tax Tip Tuesday. So Doug will have his tax tips when we come back. So our daily look at the financial markets. Some caution out there on Wall Street today, pulling back by more than 400 points on the Dow. S&P and the NASDAQ also down in excess of 1%. Doug Flynn, certified financial planner, co-founder at Flynn Zito, joins us now. So some caution for stocks, no caution at all for Bitcoin, which was at a record today. So what's going on?
Yeah, Bitcoin went up a lot, and then it actually came down about $8,000 all within one day. So about a $10,000 swing, give or take. But that's what you're going to get in that kind of an investment. But the market itself, the big companies are a big percentage. And as they go, the market's going. And what's interesting to me is now that Amazon is in the Dow is tracking pretty much like the S&P. And Walgreens was up today, but it's not in the Dow, and Amazon was down. So that's affecting
You were telling us that would be a big deal, the Amazon story. You're right. That's because of the way things are weighted. It does have quite an impact. I want to talk about this credit card fees story for a moment. I mentioned it before the break that President Biden's finalizing this rule to cap credit card late fees at $8. And, the average late fee is $32. They think, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, this could save a decent amount of money. Good idea, big deal. How do you view it?
Yeah, actually, this is one of the few things I think the CFPB should be focusing on. And apparently 45 million people pay late fees to the tune of $220 a year. So it's like a $10 billion savings for people. And, when you have big companies making billions of dollars in profits, this is an easy way to kind of scale that back a little bit, but help the people that are really spending it. Because the big key about late fees and any other interest is any credit card that you have a balance on, the minute the late fee hits or the minute that there's an additional charge, you pay interest from that day. So it's not even just the fees. It's the compounding interest and everything else that goes with it. So I think this is a good use of their time. We could talk about other things where they're probably not putting their time in the most beneficial.
Speaking of talking about other things, everybody today's talking about the fact that it's Tuesday, not Super Tuesday, but Tax Tip Tuesday. You'd be surprised. You run into anybody on the street, and that's one of the first things that comes up. Doug Flynn's Tax Tip Tuesday. Forget about the politics. So today, we're actually looking at rental properties, right, which is interesting. So take us through this on the tax benefits if you're making income from a rental property and what people need to know.
Yeah, with the advent of homeownership getting harder, more people are renting, and boomers are the biggest 18% up increase in rentals. So if you want to invest in a way to capitalize on that or just own real estate, there's some significant tax breaks which we go through, and then talk about the ownership styles. But real quickly, there's a number of benefits that you get from ownership of real estate directly. The first one is some deductions that you don't get from your primary residence, like taxes and fees to manage the property. You can write that off. There's depreciation. You can actually take the value of the property and get an additional tax deduction based on a declining percentage of value that the property has, whether it's commercial or residential. That's humongous. If you have a $500,000 property, you're taking additional write-offs against your income. You also get the special capital gains tax treatment if you hold it more than a year. But you're also eligible for what's called a 1031 exchange. So sometimes people have a big gain in a property, and rather than sell it, they want to exchange it to something else and continue that deferral. You can do that. There's not a lot of investments that you continue to do that with, but this one you can. You also get, like any side business or side hustle, you have to pay FICA tax and self-employment tax on those earnings. That's excluded for rental income. It's not subject to the self-employment tax. So another huge savings there. And lastly, there's opportunity zones set up around the United States by the government. You get significant tax advantages for investing in those to help those areas, not the least of which is if you hold that property and have a big gain after 10 years, it's waived. You don't have to pay the taxes on the gain. So some good benefits to owning real estate. And then we could talk about the different ways you can own it. I think it's really important that people understand how you can also own it if you have a second.
All right, go ahead real quick on that, and then we'll wrap it up.
Direct ownership, of course, but if you don't have that individually, you could team up with friends and family. And there's a company out there called Nestment, and you can find them at nestment.com. They're into the co-buying. That's a way to easily do it. They connect you with people to make that very, very easy, because all those breaks really come from direct ownership. The other ways you can invest in real estate through real estate investment trusts, there are some benefits, but not quite as good. There's some income benefits, but direct ownership really is the key. And you want to have this in addition to your stocks and your bonds and your cash and everything else. So it's an important part of the portfolio.
Diversify it, diversify it. Great advice as always. We always learn something from Professor Doug Flynn, so thank you. Rental income, the seminar today. We'll talk to you again tomorrow. Thank you, Doug, on all the business news. You know, we were talking earlier in the show about the crime surge in D.C., right, Washington, D.C. Well, now crime taking out a new meeting when our correspondent out west in San Francisco becomes the target of the crime. That story next. California voters this Super Tuesday getting the chance to vote on legislation that would allow residents to take a tougher stance on crime and drugs. In San Francisco, voters will decide on two measures that could expand police presence in that city, including use of surveillance cameras and drones. In Los Angeles, 11 hopefuls challenging the DA there, George Gascon, who's held a progressive stance on misdemeanor offenses and nonviolent felonies. Now, when we speak of crime, our own News Nation correspondent Nancy Liu, who's joining us now from the Bay Area, unfortunately was going out to do some reporting on all of this and found herself and her crew in the middle of the story. What happened, Nancy?
Well, Connell, I grew up in Northern California, and whenever we come to San Francisco, we know to be on guard, and we're actually under armed guard. But maybe my number was just up. We went over to Oakland to conduct some interviews, and while we were inside interviewing someone, our car parked right outside, my bag not in the front, not in view, but someone bashed the side window, stole my work bag, which had my News Nation laptop, my News Nation parka, all of my work gear, and just swiped it. I did report it to Oakland police, have yet to hear anything back, but that's just par for the course. around here. I mean, there are just all kinds of victims of crime everywhere you turn here in the Bay Area. And Connell, here in San Francisco, you still see a lot of open air drug use. It really is status quo still.
Well, we're just glad you're okay, obviously. We're going to get somebody to send you out a new jacket. Those are great News Nation jackets. We can't have you not having your News Nation jacket. Jeez. But seriously, for businesses even, and I'm sure this is probably part of what you were reporting on when you were right across the street from your crew car doing the work, is that this has got to be a deterrent still. It's going on for years and years. But what's the impact of this been, and especially in the small business community out there?
Well, the manager of a restaurant that we were interviewing when that happened, when our car was broken into, he tells us that that restaurant, Agave Uptown, it has been burglarized 22 times since 2016, 3 times in just the recent 3 weeks. And it's just been a horrible situation. Take a listen to what he has to say, because it's also scaring away customers.
These crimes are taking away a lot of our clients because people doesn't feel safe anymore, and people doesn't want to park their car outside because next thing they know, their window's broken, and it's not worth it for our clients to come and dine with us and spend a certain amount of money and then going outside and knowing that their car is broken.
Which is exactly what happened to us while we were inside interviewing. And Connell, no shortage of business owners who are impacted. We interviewed another shop owner who had up to $40,000 in leather goods stolen just on Friday. It was part of a bunch of shops that were hit on last week. And then after that interview, another shop owner came out to say she was carjacked and robbed right before those burglaries. So everywhere you turn, there's just someone with a story about crime in the Bay Area.
Yeah, and you're one of them now, Nancy. All right, thank you. I'm glad, like I said, we're glad you're all right. Nicole Cruz all right. Thank you for that, Nancy Liu, out in San Francisco. While we're talking about the state of California, I want to bring Jessica Milan Patterson in right now as the chair of the Republican Party out in California, the California GOP. Jessica, this is, I guess, you're going to tell me on the ballot today, right? Super Tuesday, crime in California?
Absolutely. This has become one of the top issues for California voters, and this is why we see, because these Democrat-run cities and these soft on crime, and they're not just soft on crime policies. These are pro-criminal policies that California Democrats have championed all over our state. So much so, some of the Democrats are joining with Republicans in a repeal of Proposition 47. Proposition 47, Prop 57, AB 109, these are all very specific pieces of legislation and ballot measures that Democrats have pushed forward to be soft on crime and to be pro-criminal. And the result has been putting more criminals out on our streets, putting violent criminals out on our streets, and criminals feeling that there are no repercussions to the crimes that they are committing here. So this is absolutely one of the top issues for California voters.
But it's still a blue state, and I think you're making the point as to why maybe the Democrats are realizing this is an issue, so they're moving more to the side of being aggressive, moving at least to the center on this, right, to try to stay in office.
Well, we'll see how it ends up for them. We've seen a nice shift in registration over the last several years. We've registered over 678,000 new Republicans since I was elected in February of 2019. But the last 2 voter registration reports have actually been the most interesting, because while we've seen a shift and increase for Republicans, over 102,000 new Republicans registered, Democrats have lost 68,000 registrations. Decline to states or no party preference have lost over 92,000 registrations. So we are seeing a shift, and Californians are open to what Republicans have to offer.
It would be a big deal, right? I mean, Arnold Schwarzenegger was the last one to win statewide. That was a while ago. So if Steve Garvey became the senator from California, that would be a big deal. That would still be a huge upset. What would you say about that as he's on running against the 3 Democrats tonight?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of people on the ballot today for that U.S. Senate seat, but the 4 leaders, Steve Garvey in the last LA Times poll is leading the charge at 27%. Adam Schiff is slightly behind him, Katie Porter behind him, and Barbara Lee behind them. But, you know, you're going up against 3 D.C. insiders. And this is someone who hasn't really been affiliated with politics. But he has a very close affiliation with the Golden State, whether that's a Dodger, a San Diego Padre, or just last week I was in Tulare County where they used to have a school that was named after him. This is a person that connects with voters on issues that are important to them. That crime
people know
issue
who he is,
about.
right? And people know who he is. I guess the final thing, what's going on out there, though? I asked our reporter about this. I've seen all these stories that Schiff is trying to spend money attacking Garvey because he wants to actually elevate Garvey because he'd rather run against him because the top 2 in the primary, that's the matchup for the fall. Is there anything to that? Is that actually what's going on, that he'd rather run against Garvey?
Well, I think that he is doing that at his own peril. You know, I think this is great for Californians because they'll actually have a choice between 2 different types of candidates. If you have Katie Porter or Barbara Lee in there, it would be two of the same. They're no different than Adam Schiff. All right, Jessica, we'll watch it. We'll be on all night watching all these. And this is one of the more interesting states to watch, California, tonight. Thanks for coming on with us. Thanks for having me.
Jessica Milan Patterson, GOP chair in the state of California. To Florida, the city of Miami. It's been trying to kind of break up with spring break, right? The unruly spring breakers that descend on Miami each year. And the Florida governor, Ron DeSantis, announced increased police presence in cities like Miami and Daytona Beach and some of these other spring break destinations. We're joined now to discuss all of this and how all of this could affect local businesses by a small business owner, David Wallach. He owns a nightclub in South Beach. All right. David, thanks for coming on. It's kind of one of these things where obviously you don't want, we're just talking about crime in California, you don't want people coming in making a mess of your place of business. And the last few years we've had some terrible headlines on spring break, but at the same time you want people coming in, spending their money and all that kind of thing. So where do you stand on this? What do you think should happen?
Well, what we would like is a wonderfully beautiful spring break crowd that respects the city, respects the property, respects each other, really, and has a wonderful time in Miami Beach.
Let me listen to, or have you listen to what Governor DeSantis said about this. See the quote there, "We don't welcome the mayhem." Here's a clip from the governor, and then we'll come back and talk about it. Let's listen.
If you're coming here in order to enjoy Florida, enjoy to have a good time, fine. If you're coming for these other reasons, if you're committing crimes, causing havoc, you are going to pay the price.
All right, so they're putting these new measures in place and increased fines and increased police presence and all the rest. Do you think this is the right way to handle it? What do you say?
Well, from a governmental standpoint, they're quite limited in what tools they have available to them. And so I totally understand the policing measures and the increased policing measures. We've seen that since 2001 with Memorial Day weekend here, when it got totally out of hand, exactly the same as this. And it didn't work. They choked it down and choked it down with restrictions and police and flak jackets and I mean the works for 14 to 17 years, and it didn't work. When a big event, the Air and Sea Show, came along, and all of a sudden that created a much more diverse crowd, Memorial Day weekend began to change. And that's really what has to happen also in Miami Beach and South Beach for spring break. This is a cultural phenomenon that's going on. It's a street party. Right. It has nothing to do with the customers of businesses. It's a street party, and it's a rite of passage. Spring break is a thing. It always has been. But in order to create a change, I believe we need a very big, different cultural phenomenon, like a fantastic 3-day, top quality concert where Paul Simon, Jennifer Hudson, you know, I mean,
Paul Simon
the great stars, the Eagles and Springsteen.
So you want to get a different crowd?
Well, it's either that or, you know, Fort Lauderdale got rid of spring break.
Right.
But they went into a 20-year depression by getting rid of it and having nothing.
So you want a different event completely, but still have a big event to bring people in, just not the spring breakers. Is that how I'm understanding you, or?
We choked Memorial Day weekend down deader, even deader than deader. And it just kept getting choked and choked and choked. Business was awful for over a decade. We need to have more imagination this time and not just choke it dead, but then have something that brings it back to life with art and culture.
That's good. I like that because it's like, hey, just don't, all the headlines, break up with spring break, but you're saying, all right, you got to break up, you got to replace it with something too. So you know the stuff, you know your stuff down there. David Wallach, and owns a restaurant nightclub in Miami Beach. Thank you, sir. Thanks for coming on. We'll watch this, see what the city ends up doing. Now, from the border to the uncommitted vote, there's a lot of storylines, right, that we're watching. You know, Super Tuesday, people say, hey, we know what's going to happen. Trump and Biden and all the rest. There are a lot of issues on the ballots worth breaking down, which we'll do. Plus, we had a breaking story earlier today from Arizona. Senator Kyrsten Sinema finally revealing what her future plans are. So we'll talk about what that might mean for the balance of power in the Senate we had up on the screen a little bit earlier. We'll be right back. So what is it? 16 states, 1 territory, hundreds and hundreds of delegates at stake. The polls close in a few hours in some of these early states with President Biden, former President Trump marching towards their party's nominations. But as I said a moment ago, there's a lot of storylines to discuss. And on the panel today, we have David Swerdlick, senior staff opinion editor for the New York Times, and Julia Manchester, national political reporter for The Hill. Welcome both. All right. Let's start with Biden, okay? Because they say, obviously, he's going to be the nominee unless something happens, right? We know that. Same with Trump. So the story for Biden here is, where are the vulnerabilities? Do we see a lot of anti-war votes again? Is there some sort of a protest or uncommitted vote? So let me ask you guys about Minnesota. Julia, you first. This is an article in The Guardian. How Gaza activists in Minnesota are now pushing the U.S. wave of uncommitted votes. Their goal, they say, is for 10,000. So maybe that's part of the story that continues tonight. What do you think?
You know, I think it certainly is part of that story. We know that there is a large Arab and Muslim population in Minnesota. I think part of the reason why, or a large part of the reason why, Michigan's uncommitted vote got so much attention last week was because that we know that Michigan is a huge swing state, that Biden won it very narrowly in 2020, Trump won it very narrowly in 2016, and that the uncommitted vote in a general election could be a big deal. But in terms of this war, I think we're already seeing the Biden administration really start to, I don't want to say correct itself, but really start to re-strategize how the campaign and the administration approaches the war. Last Sunday in Alabama, Kamala Harris was speaking to a crowd when she called for a ceasefire. That was probably the starkest language I've seen on a ceasefire from this campaign, the administration, since the beginning of the war. We, of course, have the State of the Union on Thursday. I'm curious to see how he uses the bully pulpit there to really approach this conflict.
All right, let's talk about another state, David, to go to you, and one you know well, North Carolina. Maybe they pushed uncommitted there, or to, anti-war vote there. But the other thing in North Carolina is the governor's race. Put up a New York Times article about that in North Carolina. North Carolina race for governor is expensive, it's closely watched, and it's probably tight. One of the country's most closely watched elections this year is this governor's race, a test of Democratic Democratic strength in a state whose narrowly divided electorate includes a crush of newcomers. You had Josh Stern, the AG there, and the Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson. Talk to us a little bit about North Carolina, David, and what we should be watching tonight.
So, Connell, the key with North Carolina is to go back to 2008 and remember that Barack Obama won this state in 2008, but then lost it in 2012, and Hillary Clinton lost in 2016, and Trump won in 2020.
Yes.
What that tells you is that this is a state that was in reach of being a purple state, but has trended red nationally, and with the exception of the governor, who right now is Roy Cooper, a Democrat, a moderate Democrat, legislative races tend to go Republican. So I think this is a race where the governor's race, I'm not going to make a prediction on that, but I will say that in terms of the presidential, that Democrats should not count on North Carolina. It's not impossible, but I wouldn't count on this in their electoral college math if I were the Biden.
Yeah, it's the only real toss-up that's out there, but you're probably right. I think there's a likelihood it could, if any of those toss-ups are going to go back to the red. A lot of people are looking at North Carolina. A lot of people are looking at Georgia, Arizona, and that, in that same kind of space. But North Carolina is the one that's on the map tonight. So, all right, that's North Carolina. Another New York Times article. I want to talk about Trump for a minute, but talking about Biden and the vulnerabilities there. This I thought was very interesting, the way the Times put it this morning about Trump. So the big question is, have we forgotten about him, essentially? Do Americans have a collective amnesia about Donald Trump? In the New York Times, more than 3 years of distance from the daily onslaught has faded, changed, and in some cases warped Americans' memory of events that at the time felt searing. So the whole piece was centered around, Julia, the idea that, Trump was right in our face for years when he was president. Now it's Biden that we see because he's the president. And as hard as it seems for me to believe, somehow people have forgotten about Trump. But do you think that is part of what's going on in this race right now with Trump leading in many of these polls?
I think that could be a way to describe it. I think when a lot of Americans are polled, when they're asked in these polls about, am I better off now than I was 4 years ago, a lot of times they're not thinking about the daily onslaught of headlines we saw in the Trump administration or the chaotic nature of the administration. They're thinking in terms of economics and how they're feeling financially. And even though we have certainly seen economic indicators that suggest the economy is improving, we're still seeing Americans reporting in polls that they're not feeling that just yet, or they don't think they're feeling it just yet.
Right.
So, yeah, I think you could call it collective amnesia, on some level. But at the same time, though, I think generally we're living in an era where we're just seeing, and, maybe this started in 2015 when Donald Trump went down the escalator, but we're living in an extreme partisan era. We're living, I think, in a chaotic era of politics. Just look back to the past year in terms of the House of Representatives. We're starting to see potential chaos start to consume the Senate with that leader fight. So I think in general, Americans are maybe starting to acclimate to this new era, or not so new era of politics that we live in that has been dominated by Trump.
Whether we want to or not. Last topic here, and David, you could weigh in on that as well, but I also want to get at least in the news and your comments on Arizona. There's a three-way race for Senate, but now it's only two, because Kristen Sinema, the incumbent senator, is an independent. It just said today she's not seeking re-election. Your thoughts on how that changes the dynamic in a key state in that race?
In Arizona, that's good news for the Democrat, Congressman Ruben Gallego. Now it's a traditional Republican versus Democrat matchup. It's only bad for Democrats if we find out tomorrow that Senator Sinema is running on a no-labels presidential ticket, but I won't speculate about that. Let me just go back to Trump. I can't prove this, but I will always believe that if he had taken the pandemic seriously, he would have won in 2020. Probably. But people are now remembering the first 3 years of his administration, not that last year when he sort of made mockery of the pandemic, and he lost key swing voters. For instance, women with college degrees in the suburbs who had had enough, and that's what put, in my view, Biden over the top.
Yeah, well, now Biden and his team, they're going to try to jog everybody's memory about January 6th, I think, and that's what you're going to see for between now and November, if there really is amnesia. All right, David and Julia, thanks on the panel. Watch the coverage all night long here. Super Tuesday, we'll start things off in a couple hours, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, with the whole crew on News Nation up until at least midnight. Now, politics maybe is not your thing. There is a brand new episode of Crime Nation tonight on the CW. They have the Doomsday Mom, Lori Vallow, in focus. In fact, Ashley Banfield will join us next with that and more. Don't go away. Jury selection underway in the James Crumbley trial. He is charged with involuntary manslaughter after his son Ethan killed those 4 students at a high school in Michigan in November of 2021. Last month, his wife Jennifer was convicted of involuntary manslaughter. Her unprecedented trial marked the first time that we'd seen a parent tried in connection with a school shooting carried out by a child. So that was the mother. Now it's the father. Ashley Banfield joins us, host of Banfield. So first things first, just give us your thoughts on this second Crumbley trial, what we should be watching for.
I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing for James Crumbley that he's following in the footsteps of his wife's trial, because A, it is not going to be good. There was media saturation on that. Anything that they want suppressed, anything they don't want the jury to hear in this case, oh, they've already heard it. But on the other side of the coin, Connell, it sure makes for a good appeal, doesn't it? Where you have all of these issues that didn't exist for Jennifer's trial. There wasn't this explosion of media and of evidence right before your case. So it's a tough one, and maybe it might turn out to be a good one. Hard to tell.
I know you'll be covering that. The reason we want to really have you on today, though, is talk about this Lori Vallow case, because I know that's the subject of the next episode of Crime Nation, which premieres on the CW tonight. So let's watch a clip of that. Here it is.
Lori's husband, Charles, is not quite as engaged in Lori's beliefs, but he is supportive. to the point where he actually builds Lori her own special room in the house where she can get away from the family and dance to loud Christian rock.
All right, so go back in time. There's this woman who killed 2 children, right? And now what will we learn tonight on the CW?
Well, first and foremost, we're coming up on the 5-year anniversary this September that those kids disappeared. And I was just doing the math as I was listening to that clip. Tylee would be 22 if she lived, and JJ would be in middle school. He'd be 12. He was just 7 years old. So it's just hard to believe it's been that long. But when you give the advent of time, Connell, to these stories, a lot more details tend to come out later on. And we're not even like finished this story because Lori just got sent down to Arizona to face 2 more murder conspiracies, right? Her another ex-husband and also the ex-husband of a niece of hers. So she's got a whole other series of trial issues to get through, and so does Chad. Chad's murder trial isn't done yet. But tonight you're going to see video from that spot right there. The neighbors across the street were there when the police showed up at Chad's home and said, we got a warrant and we're going to start poking around and maybe poking underground. And so for the first time, we're seeing video from the neighbors as those police arrived and started digging and discovered the bodies of these 2 kids buried in that yard.
Boy, terrible, terrible stuff. I have one other clip from that. I think it involves a brother that you could put in context for us. This, again, from Crime Nation tonight. Let's watch.
I waited to hear from Lori myself, and Lori said, I'm transitioning into an immortal body. And I said, what? She goes, yeah, I don't have to eat anymore, and if somebody shot me, the bullet would just go right through me. And I mean, literally, I'm standing there going, oh my gosh.
That's her brother, Adam.
Yeah, so Adam Cox, we all discovered, had been spending a lot of time talking to Lori's husband, Charles Vallow, about how off the chain this, sister of his had become, how spiritually bonkers she had become. And they were both very worried. Charles Vallow was there's Charles, very worried for his wife, and Adam Cox was very worried for his sister. And the 2 of them were discussing, what should we do? And ultimately, Adam had no idea what was going to happen. Charles is going to be shot dead by their other brother. And so, the turns that this story took, the fact that Adam was there at trial to watch his sister get 3 life sentences for murdering her current husband's late wife and her own 2 children. And now he's starting to really piece together, did this also happen to Charles? Did she do it to Charles?
Right.
He'll probably show up at trial, I think, in Arizona, too.
Wow. Crazy stuff. Ashley, that'll be tonight in the CW. So great to have you on, as always. Ashley Banfield, Crime Nation CW. Premieres tonight. We'll be right back with more here on News Nation Now. Don't go away. News Nation special live coverage of all the Super Tuesday results will start tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern, so we'll see you there for that. Great moment here before we wrap up this hour of coverage. 4 people welcomed on board the International Space Station. They were sharing hugs. You have 3 American astronauts, 1 Russian cosmonaut. They're all beginning a 6-month journey aboard the ISS, despite, the war in Ukraine and continuing tensions with between the U.S. and Russia. The 2 countries continue to work together in space. And there you see it. All right, that does it for us here on News Nation Now. We thank you for joining us today and every day. The news continues as Elizabeth Vargas reports.
Hello, everybody. We're talking presidential primaries, problematic parenting, and the latest on criminals crossing the border. I'm Elizabeth Vargas, and America's News starts right now.
It's Super Tuesday, and the top issue for voters, the rampant migrant crisis at the border. This as a suspect on the terror watch list is arrested trying to cross into Texas. Where in the U.S. was he headed? America's crime problem making news again, and this time a News Nation crew was the victim. Is this the new normal? And his son pulled the trigger. But is the father to blame for the deaths? This Michigan man could be headed to prison for his parenting.
But first, it is Super Tuesday 2024, the biggest primary election night in America. At this moment, millions of voters in 15 states from California to Alabama are casting their ballots for the Republican and Democratic nominations. First polls close in about 2 hours, and by the end of the night, it could be all over but the shouting. But don't worry, there'll still be plenty of shouting. On the Republican side, Nikki Haley's critics say her obituary has already been written in Iowa, in New Hampshire, and in South Carolina, her own home state, but that she's refusing to read it. Despite what polls and current delegate counts say about her dwindling chances of blocking Donald Trump from steamrolling to the nomination, she still vows on to fight.
They were asking me when I was going to quit back in July. They were asking in August. They asked before Iowa. They asked after Iowa. They asked after New Hampshire. They asked after South Carolina. And they will ask multiple times today. And I think that they have probably realized that, look, we have a country to save. And I am fighting because as long as 70% of Americans say they don't want Joe Biden or Donald Trump, as long as there are states out there that say they want their voices heard, we're going to keep doing it.
Haley's strategy appears to hinge on being the last person standing if something happens to stop Trump from running, say a criminal conviction. But that is looking less likely with each Trump victory in court, including yesterday's unanimous Supreme Court decision barring states from booting Trump off the ballot as an insurrectionist. So how super is Super Tuesday? Well, at stake on the Republican side are 865 delegates. That's more than 70% of the total needed to win the nomination. And for those keeping score, right now Donald Trump has 221. So a big win tonight could put him within striking distance of the Republican crown and mathematically eliminate Haley. On the Democratic side, the nomination appears to be a lock for President Biden. Tonight, for the incumbent, it's less a question of delegate counts. Really, it's all about enthusiasm. And there is a question over how much of the vote he could lose. There's a push among some Democrats to vote uncommitted over Biden's handling of the Israel-Gaza war. And at least half of the states voting today have uncommitted slots on the ballot. The top issue for voters this election cycle is a problem that will not be easy for anyone to fix: the spiraling crisis at the southern border. And as we've been reporting in recent days, the issue isn't just about the quantity of people crossing. In some cases, it's also about the quality. Specifically, are some of them, just a small few, but still, are some of them dangerous criminals? It's not xenophobic to ask the question, and don't let anyone bully you into thinking otherwise. There was breaking news today out of Texas that an illegal immigrant from Colombia, reportedly on the terror watch list, was arrested in Eagle Pass just days before Donald Trump visited that border city. Let's go now to NewsNation's Allie Bradley live from Eagle Pass. Allie, what do we know about this suspect, how he was caught, and why he's on the terror watch list?
Yeah, hey, Elizabeth. So our DHS sources were able to confirm here that 40-year-old Colombian, his name is actually Carlos Obed Yepes Bedoya. And he actually entered in, as you mentioned, just a week before President Trump was down here in the Eagle Pass area. And that's exactly where he crossed into. And this happened on February 21st. What our DHS sources confirm here is that Texas DPS actually apprehended this individual and then turned him over to Border Patrol. He was then transported to the soft-sided facility here that is called Firefly. That is where they do the initial processing and screening. So that is where they would have found out that he was on that terror watch list. When they do the fingerprinting and they check in on those databases, there is where he would have flagged. And that is what we know about that individual. But he also told Border Patrol that he was heading to Houston as his address when he got here to this country. Now, right now, he does have a detainer through ICE because he was turned over to the U.S. Marshals for criminal proceedings. So right now, he does have that active detainer for his arrest, or for him right now, Elizabeth. So once he goes through the process, then he will end up in ICE custody at some point. But his apprehension is what has voters here concerned. We've talked to people down here on the ground who have lived in Eagle Pass their entire lives. We talked with Lupita and her husband, Toby, who tell us they are welcoming to people who are here to have a better life, of course, but they're concerned who is coming across. They don't know who these individuals are. We've been reporting here at News Nation, we don't have access to these criminal databases, and that is the reality here. If they're not a criminal here in the United States, they don't flag on an Interpol or terrorist watch list, then we likely won't know if they have criminal history. Now, we actually talked with Representative Tony Gonzalez. He represents this district and much of the southern border. He says the most important thing today for voters is to show up. Take a listen to what he had to say.
We cannot allow 7,000 people entering the country illegally to be and no one say a word about it. I mean, it's going, oh, the numbers are down from December, but yet it's a historic February. We cannot allow this. And the way we do that is we're vocal, we show up, and we make sure that our voice is heard, but also that our vote is heard.
Okay, so Elizabeth, for some perspective, how many individuals have been nabbed on that terrorist watch list across our southern border? Now, this is between ports and also at the ports as well. We've already seen 66 individuals since this fiscal year began, which was October 1st. That is on pace to match last year's number of 249 individuals who flagged on that terrorist watch list. Elizabeth.
All right, Allie Bradley, 66 people on the terrorist watch list just in the past several months. Thank you so much. All right, a lot to dig in with here, so let's do it with our political panel. I'm joined now by former Illinois Congressman Joe Walsh, and Johanna Maska is a News Nation political contributor and CEO of the Global Situation Room. Thanks so much, both of you, for being here. Joe, you've been on the show before talking about this. Border immigration, #1 issue now for voters. It's a huge vulnerability for Joe Biden, and he's trying to use the fact that Republicans rejected their own compromise border deal after Trump urged them not to pass it. Do you think it could possibly backfire on Trump, or is Biden just wishing for something that won't happen?
No, Elizabeth, always good to be with you. I think this is just too late. Look, I say this as a former Republican. Republicans demagogue the issue of the border, and I did some of that myself. But Democrats are out to lunch with this issue. They don't understand this issue. They dismiss this issue of the border, and they don't get how big of an issue this is with most Americans, not just Republican-based voters, most Americans. And the problem at the border is there, Elizabeth, because Joe Biden encouraged it, and then he ignored it for 3 years, and now he's trying to do something about it. Of course, Republicans won't help him, but I just think it's too late for the Democrats on this issue.
Joanna, do you agree?
Well, so there's a frustration, I would say, Joe, because you've got the progressive left who want more immigrants to come to this country. They want to make sure that the people who are already in this country and have been for 20 years are made legal and whole. And we haven't been able to get that reform. There's no easy talking points on the Democratic side, but we both know, because you were there and we've seen this, that congressional inaction just continues, and we allow it to continue because one party will spike it all just for their own their own talking point for this next election. And that's what we did see we had Republicans really get more than they've got out of Democrats on border security in this Senate bill in a long time. So I think you're going to see President Biden on Thursday and continuing to challenge President Trump. If you want to be part of the solution, come to the table now. Don't wait until after November.
Yeah, Thursday in the State of the Union address, he is expected definitely to address this issue. Johanna, Nikki Haley has pledged repeatedly to stay in the race through Super Tuesday. That's today. Could we see her end her campaign tonight if she loses big?
You know, I don't know. Honestly, Elizabeth, she's been a Republican longer than Donald Trump. And if it was a Democratic socialist who had taken my party, I would fight as long as I could. And I'm very interested tonight to see if any of the down ballot races, particularly in North Carolina, are affected by her staying in. She is a Reagan Republican. She has every right to be in this race. And I would say if it were me and it was my party, I would fight till the dying breath.
All right, I'm going to ask you about that governor's race in North Carolina in just a moment. But, Joe, the big question moving forward is where do all of Nikki Haley's voters go now? So because while she's lost every primary contest except D.C., she has garnered an average of 30% of Republican voters in each of those contests. That's not an insignificant number, especially in a close general election.
No, but not all of those voters are Republicans. Look, this is not Nikki Haley's Republican Party anymore. It's not. So many people have a hard time wrapping their arms around that. It's not my Republican Party anymore. If Nikki Haley wants to remain a Republican, the only way she can do that is get out of the race and endorse Donald Trump, which is what I think she'll do. Elizabeth, I think when she gets out, most of her voters will rally to Trump, but some won't, and some will support Joe Biden.
All right, lots of attention. I want to get to this race in North Carolina for governor. It's shaping up to be the most expensive and divisive race outside the presidential contest. North Carolina is a swing-ish state. It went for Obama in 2008. It didn't go for Obama 4 years later. Trump has endorsed the Republican candidate for governor, Mark Robinson, who he calls, quote, Martin Luther King on steroids. Here he is on Saturday night.
This is Martin Luther King on steroids. Okay, now, I told that to Mark. I said, I think you're better than Martin Luther King. I think you are Martin Luther King ×2.
Trump gave Robinson his full-throated endorsement, but Robinson has said that homosexuality is a filthy abomination. He's called teenagers who survived the Parkland High School shooting, quote, prostitutes who need to sit down and shut up. He used his Facebook account to call the Holocaust of Jews in World War II, quote, hogwash, and said Hitler was taken out of context and needs to be reconsidered. Joanna, this is the Republican nominee for governor, and Trump just endorsed him.
Yeah. No, and this is why I'm watching these races, because, you know, it's him, and there's a MAGA woman who was actually at the Capitol who's running in a congressional seat who could beat an Army colonel who is also running, another woman who's running. And if you've got those kinds of Republicans on the ballot, I mean, Joe, that's the question. What happens to those Republicans who feel completely left behind? Again, if I were my party, I would absolutely stay home if that was my representation.
Yeah, and Joe, reproductive rights has proved to be a potent issue in elections in the last year. This candidate for governor has also said, quote, I don't care if you're 24 hours pregnant or 24 weeks pregnant. If you kill that young one, it's murder.
Elizabeth, until I'm blue in the face, I just think most of America has a hard time wrapping their arms around the fact that one of our two major political parties is pretty damn fully radicalized. This candidate reflects a big chunk of the Republican Party base. I think we need to understand that. It's a scary thought, but this is where that party is, and your nominee for president, Donald Trump, just warmly embraced him.
Well, we'll see what the voters have to say, because they get their say today in North Carolina, along with all the other states participating in Super Tuesday. It's going to be a very exciting night. Joe Walsh, Johanna Maska, thanks for kicking it all off for us. I really appreciate it.
Great to join.
Coming up, breaking news today is one of the more prominent members of the Senate announces she's out. Could this tip the balance of power in the Senate? Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson joins me live next on the future of the party and who might lead it in the Senate. All right, we're just getting Senator Ron Johnson's live shot all checked in, make sure he's all mic'd properly. But while we wait for him, we're going to move on to this other story, which is a mind-boggling story. One of the rules of journalism is you don't ever make the story about yourself, but sometimes the story makes itself about you. NewsNation's Nancy Liu had just such an experience as she was reporting on the ongoing California crime wave that's hit all of the Golden State's big cities. From retail theft rings to smash and grabs, crime is top of mind for California voters heading to the polls today. NewsNation's been following this issue for months, and just yesterday, Nancy was interviewing a restaurant manager whose business was robbed 22 times. And that's when someone broke into her car across the street. Nancy was only away from the car for about 10 minutes when this happened.
if you own a business in Oakland, like, you're going to get broken into at some point.
That point was last Friday for shop owner Liz Thayer, who's missing as much as $40,000 worth of leather goods.
I know a lot of people are leaving the Bay Area now because they're just like over their car getting stolen, their windows getting smashed, their house getting broken into. If the reports say that crime is down right now, but it does not feel like that at all.
Right around the corner, this shop owner is also struggling to survive. Her store spared during the burglaries last week, but she was carjacked and robbed right before. She moved here from LA just last year.
In less than a year, I've had my car broken into 3 times. Our shop glass has been broken in twice. And now this with, being mugged and my car being stolen. It's like, is it worth the fight? It definitely has been a real upsetting thing and a lot to think about.
Tales of criminal activity are everywhere, and the manager of Agave Uptown is especially wary. The restaurant's been hit 22 times since 2016, and recently 3 times in 3 weeks.
These crimes are taking away a lot of our clients because people doesn't feel safe anymore. And people doesn't want to park their car outside because next thing they know, their window's broken. And it's not worth it for our clients to come and dine with us and spend a certain amount of money and then going outside and knowing that their car is broken.
That's exactly what happened to our News Nation crew vehicle parked right outside. In the less than 10 minutes we were inside filming that interview, my work bag and computer stolen. A crime committed as we covered widespread crime.
We are struggling trying to survive.
All right, Nancy Liu joins us now. I can't believe you were reporting on crime and then in 10 minutes turned out to be a victim of it.
Ironic. I think my number was just up, Elizabeth. I've come here so often for work on assignment, and I always have my guard up. We are under guard right now, but things happen, and it took just minutes for that to happen. And my bag was not in the open. So now I'm without my computer, I'm without hairspray, without anything.
But you look great.
Work. But it is what it is, and we're all okay, and that's what's important.
Yeah, it is. But I know I've heard reports of entire cars up and down a street with their windows smashed because robbers just worked their way down the row of parked cars. Nancy Liu, thank you so much. Go ahead.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Well, news crews are always targeted here in the Bay Area. Policing in San Francisco is on the ballot today. There is a Prop B that would expand the police force here by going up to 2,000 in the next 5 years, but that would raise taxes. And there's also a Prop E, which would allow police to use more technology like drones to surveil and chase suspects. So policing is top of mind around here.
Absolutely. All right, Nancy Liu reporting live from San Francisco. Thanks so much. All right, turning now back to politics. Our next guest is rarely shy about expressing himself, so this should be good. Wisconsin Republican Senator Ron Johnson is part of a growing group of possible successors to Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, who announced just days ago he would step down as leader in November. Now, whoever emerges victorious will have to lead an ever-fracturing Congress, underscored today by news that one of only 3 independent senators, Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona, announced she will not run for re-election. If Republicans manage to win her seat in Arizona, it would pave a clearer path to a majority for Republicans in the Senate, making the race to replace McConnell even more important than ever. Joining us now is Senator Ron Johnson. He also sits on the Senate Homeland Security Committee. Senator, good to have you here. So independent Senator Kyrsten Sinema made her announcement. Listen to what she had to say.
Because I choose civility, understanding, listening, working together to get stuff done, I will lead the Senate at the end of this year.
All right, those are pretty damning words about the body in which both of you serve.
Hello, Elizabeth. Yeah, I mean, the dysfunction here in Washington, D.C. is profound. And I appreciate Senator Sinema's, standing firm and maintaining the Senate filibuster, which means you need a larger than mere majority to pass things of significance. I think that's a good idea for America. And unfortunately, if Democrats get control of the House, the Senate, and the White House, they'll get rid of that filibuster and then terms of what's going to happen to this country.
Yeah, but what do you mean by, you say it's profoundly dysfunctional? I don't need to tell you that many Americans are profoundly frustrated with Congress and its lack of action, especially the House, which I know you don't serve in, but it's Congress.
Well, listen, I come from the private sector, and in the private sector, most successful organizations have a vision statement, they have a mission statement, they establish goals. The people that are in that organization understand what their roles are in terms of achieving that mission and these goals. That's not what Congress is. I mean, Congress is grotesquely dysfunctional. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that so very few bureaucrats, staff members, and even members of Congress have no experience in, which means very little knowledge of, and of course no sympathy for the private sector. Plus, they've never even served or worked in a functioning organization. They view this as normal. I think this is an alternate universe here, and I think it shows in terms of dysfunction. Here we are, about halfway through the fiscal year. We haven't even funded it. This shouldn't be that hard. This isn't rocket science. We spend way too much money, but we could at least have a functioning process for funding the government.
All right. Well, Senator Sinema is no doubt feeling stung that after she worked closely with other senators, especially like conservative Senator James Lankford, for months on what was seen as the most conservative border bill in decades, never got a vote. After former President Trump urged Republicans not to support it, the bill was endorsed by the Border Patrol Union, whose members are out there every day doing their best. Tell me why you're against that bill.
The problem with that bill, it was worse than doing nothing. The president has the authority to secure the border. Trump used it. Biden used that same authority to open up the border. He can use that authority to close it. Now, it's been weakened over time through certain court decisions. Nobody on our side was looking for an immigration bill. That bill actually limited the future president's authority, while it also codified an awful lot of President Biden's open border policy. It would normalize thousands of immigrants a day. So again, the bill was worse than doing nothing. And what Democrats were by and large negotiating for wasn't to secure the border. They were looking for a political cover. And unfortunately, Leader McConnell, who negotiated the bill, Senator Murphy said he wrote it, or his staff wrote it, gave them that political cover. So Trump had nothing to do with that thing being killed. It killed itself. It was such an awful bill.
Nikki Haley called Donald Trump, quote, completely unhinged for opposing the border deal, and said, quote, we cannot wait one more day to secure that border. We've got to start now. Is she wrong?
Yes, because Nikki Haley obviously doesn't understand how bad that bill was. This wasn't talked about enough, but the 5,000 person per day threshold that made closing the border mandatory, no longer processing asylum claims. The nasty provision was at 4,000. It was discretionary, which would imply and codify the fact that the president already doesn't have the authority. The president has that authority, and then even worse, that authority to stop processing asylum claims would only last for 3 years. That's why the bill was worse than doing nothing. It actually weakened the president's authority. I can't believe the negotiators didn't understand that about their own bill.
You objected to the $60 billion in aid to Ukraine that was passed recently in the Senate. You said in an interview with Real America's Voice that Putin is a war criminal, but you also said Putin won't lose. He is not going to lose. Aren't you helping ensure Putin wins by refusing to help the country he invaded?
I think it's time that policymakers here in Washington, D.C. start recognizing reality. Schumer came out of the White House meeting and said, it's simple, $60 billion and Ukraine wins. You don't give them the $60 billion, they lose. How are they going to win? Right now, we are in a 2-year bloody stalemate. And I think you really need to start questioning, should we throw another $60 billion to fuel the flames of bloody stalemate? Because every day that goes by, more Ukrainians die, more Russian conscripts die, more of Ukraine gets destroyed. If you're concerned about the Ukrainian people, you ought to be concerned about that as well. So we have no strategy to win. The administration is not laying it out. If we're going to support Ukraine, it ought to be in a way that's going to bring Putin to the negotiating table so this war can end. I'm not hearing that at all. I'm hearing that President Biden hasn't even spoken to Russia on this, and I would be very interested to know what happened in Istanbul shortly after the war started, when Boris Johnson, basically on the behalf of the Biden administration, scuttled any kind of peace agreement. So we do need to do a complete reevaluation of this, and right now it is true we should secure our own border before we send $60 billion down a rat hole to secure some other nations.
But to be clear, you don't want Putin to win in Ukraine, do you?
Of course not. Nobody does. I don't think he's going to has that capability. We have thwarted him, and right now Putin's got to be taking a look at this. This is not a particularly good success either. So there ought to be incentives on both sides to end this bloody stalemate. Our policy ought to be to reduce tensions in the world, to end this war, not fuel the flames of a bloody stalemate.
All right, Senator Ron Johnson, 10 seconds. Are you going to win the speakership in the Senate, or are you going to stay out of that little tussle for power?
I'm looking at a process to determine what our mission is, and hopefully leaders will emerge from that process.
Okay. I think that was a non-answer. Very diplomatic of you, sir. Senator Ron Johnson from the state of Wisconsin, thanks so much for being here. And coming up, James Crumbly gets his day in court just weeks after his wife was convicted of involuntary manslaughter in their son's deadly school shooting. So will his defense be any different? In Michigan, a new chapter of legal history is set to be written as jury selection gets underway in the involuntary manslaughter trial of James Crumbly. He's the first father to face homicide-level charges for a child's crime. His wife, Jennifer, set legal history last month when she was convicted of those same charges, making her the first mother ever found guilty in a child shooting. Their son, Ethan Crumbly, opened fire at Oxford High School in 2021, killing 4 students in the deadliest shooting in that state's history. As James takes his turn in court, there'll be similarities to his wife's trial, but stark differences as well. He faces the same charges, the same judge, the same prosecution, evidence, and many of the same witnesses. But the jury and the defense team will be different. Also different, the prosecution's focus. It is expected they will zero in on the gun used in the shooting that James bought and was responsible for storing. And a new key witness has been allowed, a student who was injured in the shooting. As for defense, it's expected to paint a more sympathetic portrait of James than his wife was painted. It's not yet known if he will take the stand as his wife, Jennifer, did. So is this deja vu all over again, or does he have a shot at acquittal? We're joined now by trial attorney and legal analyst Misty Maris and trial attorney Rebecca Rose Woodland. Thank you both for being here. I've got to ask first about this witness, the student who was injured in this. Why this new witness, and what is this witness supposed to say?
So this was a victory for the prosecution because, as we know, in Jennifer's trial, the defense tried to keep out anyone that was actually at the school that day, saying it was prejudicial. So this witness is now being allowed to testify about their experience, their injury.
Why?
That they were a
Why
victim.
not in the first trial? Why in this trial?
The judge actually found that in this case it was relevant because it directly relates to the use of the firearm by Ethan.
Rebecca, today, actually, as jury selection is starting, the James Crumbly's lawyers move for a change of venue. Obviously, the whole world, the nation followed this trial very closely. He was denied, but I can see why he asked. It seems like everybody in that community has an opinion.
Look, his defense attorney has to ask for something like that, given the fact that the wife was already found guilty in the same courtroom with the same judge. But realistically, everyone in the country is following this case, so it's very hard to argue as a defense attorney that there'll be jurors in another location that will have less knowledge than the jurors in the location they are currently trying the case.
All right, I want you both to weigh in on this. Rebecca, you first. In the first trial, Jennifer Crumbly really did not come across so well. She testified on the stand. She was asked if you could go back and do anything differently, would you? And she said no. We've got 4 dead kids and a lot of people with psychological scarring as a result of this shooting. Her son is in prison for the rest of his life. She said no. Is there a chance he'll come off less unsympathetically?
I mean, we don't know yet if he will take the stand. Even if he does not, I find it very hard to believe that they would want to put him on the stand because of her testimony and her behavior. They're taking a very big chance with him because she was terribly unsympathetic, which makes me think that possibly this family was a very broken family before this incident.
And yet, Misty, there's that videotape. Let's roll that. I want everybody to watch this for a second. This is Jennifer and James visiting their son shortly after he's been arrested for opening fire in his school, killing 4 kids, and they go into his jail cell. Watch this.
Okay, so we're going to ask you a bunch of questions about why you did this. I don't think we need to have so many questions right now. Why? I did it. Why? I love you. I love you. I love you. I love you.
All right, you see, and it actually goes on and on and on. James continues saying, I love you, I love you. She's yelling at her son, why? And he's saying, I love you. So is it possible that she looked really bad, according to everything she was, posting on Facebook and texting, and that he might not?
Well, so he wasn't involved in some of those text messages that were central to the Jennifer Crumbley case, so I could see that playing into it. And again, whether or not he takes a stand, we don't know, but they might hold off on that and say, since he's not involved in the text messages, the central issue here is going to be that gun, the purchase of the gun, the storage, the safekeeping, so he might not need to take the stand on that. She had a lot to explain regarding her communications with Ethan and regarding the case that was built against her, which was basically that she was aloof and more interested than herself, than her son. I think the case is going to be a little different when it comes to him.
But there was a text message from Ethan Crumbley about his father that was used in Jennifer Crumbley's trial, in which Ethan Crumbley says, I went to my mom and dad, I asked for psychological help, I asked for, I'm seeing demons, I'm seeing things flying. My dad, quote, laughed at me and told me to suck it up.
Right, and here's where the distinction is. It's not to him. It's about him, but it's not to him. Many of the text messages that were central to her case were between her and Ethan. I'm seeing the plates are flying, all of this. He's not on those. So I think from a defense perspective, they're going to try and make that distinction about what he knew and didn't know as opposed to Jennifer Crumbley. But the case is a challenge on the gun.
But isn't that damning if the son is saying, my dad told me to suck it up when I asked him for help for my mental health?
We also have the incident in the school that both parents were called with these terrible complaints by the school, the drawings, the aggressive violence. Both parents were there. Both parents left. The father, knowing the gun is in the house, or thinking at that point that the gun was still in the house, didn't even return home to check, where is the firearm? I bought this child a firearm. I didn't tell people in the school that I bought this child a firearm. These are very damning issues for the defense.
Does he have more culpability because he is the one who took James to the gun store to buy the gun? And that, according to Jennifer, testified, I mean, she kind of threw him under the bus. She said, I don't know anything about how to store the gun. That was James's job.
Right. I mean, within the scope of gross negligence, they're both grossly negligent, in my opinion. And yes, his culpability would be more clear to a jury, I think, on the gun issue.
You make such a good point. And remember, we're likely to see the same jury instructions, which were these 2 different manslaughter theories, one directly relating to leaving a firearm available and open to the use of a minor. And so that's a central focus. And we know that because of a new witness that's coming in, which is the prior gun owner, to talk about the condition of that gun.
At the very least, he has the advantage, he and his lawyers, of having watched his wife, the first trial of this.
They have the blueprint. They have the blueprint of the prosecution's case, but still a tough case for the defense.
I believe
it is going to be so fascinating to see if legal history is once again made in that courtroom in Michigan. Misty Maris, Rebecca Rose Woodland, thank you both for being here. Really appreciate it. All right, coming up, one of the most important contests that's this Super Tuesday doesn't feature the names Trump or Biden, but you will recognize the candidates fighting for a big Senate seat out west. Details next. All right, welcome back on this busy Super Tuesday as Americans head to polls in 15 states. A reminder that News Nation's special live coverage is just over an hour away. Join me and the News Nation team at 7 p.m. Eastern for results and analysis throughout the evening. News Nation chief Washington correspondent and the Hill moderator Blake Berman will be part of all of our special coverage. But first, you have your show coming up in less than 10 minutes now.
You get an hour off, Elizabeth, huh?
Oh,
in
it's so
between your
luxurious.
show and then that 5 hours of coverage, maybe a bite to eat, a little dinner or something.
Hoping.
Yeah, we're looking forward to special coverage coming up at 7. Polls start to close in some states, as you know, so we'll get the first results here shortly. And as we watch whatever happens here on Super Tuesday, obviously we're, waiting to see how big Donald Trump can run up the tally on the Republican side. President Biden, by the way, he's at the White House. He's getting ready for the State of the Union. We're going to get into all of that on the Hill. But as we look forward to Super Tuesday and the votes and getting into those numbers, there's another number that happened today. It was 69,000, Elizabeth. That is what Bitcoin hit at one point earlier today, an all-time high. Coming up on the Hill, we're going to be talking to Anthony Pompliano, founder of Pomp Investments. You might know him simply as Pomp. What should the government do now that Bitcoin is at this? The federal government actually has a pretty big haul of Bitcoin, and he just wrote an article about, you know what? Maybe pension funds should start getting into the game with this, whether you're a firefighter, teacher, retired, whoever you might be. We'll get into all that coming up here on the Hill, top of the hour in about 10 minutes' time.
All right, politics and tech, I guess. Is Bitcoin, is it technically called tech? Is it tech? I don't even know.
Money, tech, however you want to define it.
I think I just exposed myself as a Luddite when it comes to Bitcoin. All right. Thanks, Blake. We'll see you soon.
We'll see that. Yeah.
All right. The late Senator Dianne Feinstein was many things. She was a trailblazing female politician. She was a masterful legislator. She was an ardent gun control advocate. And sadly, in her later years, she was the face of Washington gerontocracy. Tonight, largely due to Feinstein's refusal to resign as she deteriorated, Californians are heading to the polls to decide who will fill her seat after she died a few months ago. The crowded field includes the major candidates on your screen: Democratic Representatives Adam Schiff, Katie Porter, and Barbara Lee, as well as Republican former Major League Baseball star Steve Garvey. They're all competing to finish out Feinstein's term this year and fill her open seat in 2025 for a full 6-year term. And for that reason, the Senate race appears twice on the California ballot. History says it will likely go to a Democrat. The Golden State's Senate seats have been blue since 1988. Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff, who rose to national prominence during the first Trump impeachment, has been the front runner throughout the race. But that could be changing. A new UC Berkeley poll found that Schiff and Garvey are in a statistical tie ahead of their opponents. California has a very complicated way of doing this. It's a top 2 primary. The top 2 candidates after today, whoever they are, from whichever party or parties, will advance to a runoff in November. The same poll found that if it's Schiff and Garvey who are the top 2, Schiff will be favored to win in November. NewsNation's Joe Khalil is live at the polling place in Burbank. And Joe, this is a coveted Senate seat we're talking about.
Yeah, it is. It's not just the late Senator Dianne Feinstein seat, but we're talking about a U.S. Senate seat from California. Anytime you've got California senators that come in, there's always an outsized presence, especially because of the amount of Democrats, just by sheer volume, from the Golden State. But you talked about the dynamic exactly right. Schiff has been in the lead. You call him the front runner basically since the beginning when it comes to polling, when it comes to money and big endorsements, including one, by the way, by former Speaker Nancy Pelosi, which really put him ahead and opened up the door for more donors. But the question is going to be who comes in second. And that is really important because, as you mentioned, they have what's called a jungle primary here in California. So whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, an independent from whatever party, everyone is on one ballot, and the top 2 vote getters advance to November. So conventional wisdom might say this is a very liberal state. You've got multiple Democrats. It may be a 2-person between Schiff and Katie Porter, for example. But the polling doesn't bear that out. You talked about Steve Garvey, the Republican, who has really been running second in most polls for the last couple of weeks. In fact, there has been some anger on the part of Katie Porter's staff and her supporters because they think that Adam Schiff's recent ad buys, $10 million over the last couple of weeks, have elevated Garvey. He's portrayed this race as a 2-person one, Elizabeth, between Schiff and Garvey. And you talked about the dynamic. If those 2 were to advance in November, it would be a much easier path for Adam Schiff Then for Katie Porter, Adam Schiff rematch. The last Republican to win statewide in California is a guy by the name of Arnold Schwarzenegger, and you got to go back to 2006 for that to happen, Elizabeth.
Yeah, and Nancy Pelosi, the former House Speaker of the House and still current congressman from California, has really put her thumb on the scale in Adam Schiff's favor, much to the frustration, I think, of Katie Porter.
Yeah. Yeah. And you got to remember, she is not just someone who is incredibly influential in the party and in California, but her endorsement sort of opens the floodgates for a lot of her big money donors here in California. So it's not just clout, it's dollars. When you get the Pelosi endorsement, that really does give you just a huge surge of momentum in a number of different ways here.
Yeah, and as I think you mentioned this, it's been so interesting. He's been doing that very controversial maneuver of airing ads, paying for ads, touting Steve Garvey to get him to get a better finish than Katie Porter, who he sees as true competition. All right, Joe Khalil, very exciting race to watch there in California and our long night ahead. I'm sure we'll be checking back in with you during our special Super Tuesday coverage. Be sure to join us at 7 p.m. Eastern. We'll be here for 5 hours as all these results come in. Join me and the rest of the News Nation team for all the very smartest analysis. Thanks so much for joining us. Time now for The Hill, moderated by Blake Berman. See you later.